the various bookstores that you all got your books from. And the other part will be readings. We're actually going to do an extra healthy dose of readings today for reasons I'll explain in a few minutes. But first off, I generally start release parties by letting a room of 5,000 to 10,000 people applaud for my team. However, today, all we have here is my team. But I'm going to still give them some thanks so that you guys know that this doesn't just come from me. We'll start with Adam, who has put together this release party and is, yes. He's probably been through about 20 monsters as he drinks, as he is stressed out about this. It's his first time kind of running a release party, so thank you, Adam. He's my in-house publicist. And also, Kara did quite a bit putting this together and making sure everyone got their books. So thank you to Kara and to her team, which includes Mem and Lex and Michael and a bunch of minions. You can clap for them too. Yes. So watching at home are Peter, my editorial director, and Karen, our continuity editor. So hello, Peter and Karen. Thank you guys so much. And sitting over in the corner, who will be speaking to you a little bit later in the middle of the presentation to give me a break, is Isaac. Isaac Stewart, our art director. He worked with a very talented team of artists, including Ben McSweeney, who's probably watching remotely at the moment, and various other painters who he'll do a lot of introductions to them. I know we have one here with us today, one of our special friends, but that is Howard, that is Isaac, and Emily, my wife. Let's applaud for her. She's the business manager at Dragonstone Entertainment. She has all the things that I would probably have to do if she weren't here, and instead I can just write books. So anything that has to do with taxes or payroll or all of the really annoying stuff of owning a business, she has to do, and I get to stand in front of people and be applauded and then spend the rest of my time telling stories about wizards. So thank you very much to Emily and to my family. Did I forget? Oh, yeah. Did I forget anybody? Once I think I forgot Peter, and that was not good. So I think we got to everybody. I suppose we can applaud for Kathy. Should we applaud for Kathy? Maybe we should applaud for Kathy. Kathy, Adam's rival, is also Emily's assistant, part-time bird wrangler, part-time child wrangler, and doing various odd jobs for us, including working in the warehouse. So there is a lot of work that goes into creating particularly Stormlight books. We have had kind of a frantic year. Now, I know everyone's had a frantic and strange year. We had the extra stress of trying to get a Stormlight book together on time while all of this was happening. And in some ways, that was good, because it meant that I was home rather than traveling the world. But in other ways, it was just one more stressor. So I'm really pleased, and you guys should make sure, if you have the opportunity to ever talk to one of them or interact with them online, thank my team, because they pushed extra hard to make this happen. We noticed lots of movies getting delayed and lots of video games getting delayed, and we thought, when the time comes for the book to come out, our fans are really going to need this. And so we did what we could, and despite dodging a few bullets, we have had it come out on time. So I am very pleased to present to you Rhythm of War.
So it crashed our website.
Okay.
So no one has seen anything you've done.
YouTube they can see.
They can see on YouTube.
So as long as that's getting propagated, I'm asking Alexis if we can share it on your Twitter and stuff like that. So
Yes.
Just so you're aware.
It crashed our website, huh?
Crashed our website.
Okay, was it embedded on the website? Is that what was happening? And so Yeah. Well, we probably should have expected that.
So Alexis is just sending it to the stores, and the stores are going to propagate it.
Okay.
So
Right. Well then, we will give them a few minutes to propagate that. And in the meantime, I am going to take a delaying random question. So can you bring us up a question, Isabel? Just pick one and bring it over. We were going to do the Q&As later on, but might as well have me talk about something while we're making sure that everything is getting propagated and things like that. And so, all right, bring it on up so everyone can see it. This is Isabel, our wonderful assistant and part-time mini-minion. What is my favorite dinosaur? My favorite dinosaur is Magellan the macaw. Which is cheating, I suppose. So if I had to pick an actual favorite dinosaur, I don't know. This is one of these things that when you have children, it starts to, during their young lives, be very important to them that everyone has a favorite everything. I don't know if that's been the same experience with those of you that have children as it was with us. But I'd never had, really given much thought, at least not in 40 years or whatever, to my favorite color. But as soon as my kids could figure out that picking a favorite color distinguished one from another, then I had to have a favorite color that was different from the favorite color of each of the children because we couldn't have the same favorite colors. And the same thing has gone on with favorite animals and favorite foods. But I did not end up ever getting asked to pick a favorite dinosaur. I don't think my kids ever really got into dinosaurs to the extent that some others have been. So I would have to say no idea what my favorite dinosaur is, unless dragons count, right? Which they probably don't. So how are we looking there, Adam? We've been giving them some time. Is our website have any chance of going back up?
Ben hasn't gotten back to me. We have about 1,600 people right now. So
1,600 people.
We're several thousand short.
We're several thousand short, huh? Well, we will figure this out for future times. I just assumed we were sending them the YouTube link also, rather than just the page link. But we didn't know what that was until just today. That's right. So, well, let's do one more question, give people a little bit more time. What is my favorite art on a Magic the Gathering card? That one I can answer because I have a lot of favorite Magic the Gathering card stuff. A lot of the things that I will pick as my favorite will harken back to my youth, right? If I'm picking a favorite book, it's often one of the favorite books that I read when I was young that got me into fantasy. And in this case, my favorite Magic card art is from Vesuvian Doppelganger, which was my favorite card when I was first really getting into Magic. For those who haven't played the game, the Vesuvian Doppelganger is a tricky card that copies someone else's thing. And my brother, when he first got into Magic the Gathering, he came back with a pack that had this giant monster in it that was super cool. It was huge. It took a lot of resources to summon. It was very big and damaging and scary and cool looking. And so I went and bought a pack, and I came back with a little, my rare card was a little assassin. It was a royal assassin. And I thought, he gets this big, awesome, cool card, and I get this little derpy thing. But then, the moment my assassin killed his big, awesome thing, and he had spent a ton of resources getting it out, and I'd spent a little bit on mine, and then just tapped it to kill his thing, I realized, ooh, this game is tricksy. And immediately a demure player was born. I started doing all sorts of black and blue, which are the tricky colors that will do all sorts of things like, you summoned a big monster, I've got a copy. And then I kill your big monster, and only I have one now. And I spent way less getting mine than yours. And so that is the sort of thing I played a ton when I was younger, and is kind of the way I still enjoy playing Magic the Gathering. How are we looking now, Adam? Have we gained any people?
Yeah, we're at about 250.
2,500, I mean?
Oh, we're at about 2,000 now.
About 2,000 now? Okay. Out of how many do we have? 10,000 possible?
Like 6,800.
6,800? All right. So, I think I will just continue on into the speech part. Thank you, Isabel. This is the part where I kind of blab at you for a little while. And I do this with all of my release parties. I come up with some sort of thing I'm thinking about or whatnot. This time is going to be a little different from other times because the thing I was thinking about led very easily into something I haven't done before at one of these release parties, but I thought would be very fun. The thing I've been thinking about this time is in relation, as they often are, into a question I get asked quite a bit. And in this case, the question that I get asked quite a bit is, if you could go back in time and change one thing about when you were breaking in, when you were trying to become an author, if you could change one thing about that, what would it be and why? And I usually answer this question by saying, I would change nothing because I have read that book. And I know what happens if you go back in time and meddle with the timeline. Either you end up accidentally killing your own grandparents, becoming your own grandparents, or you step on a butterfly and America turns communist, right? These are like the only 3 good outcomes. Those are the good ones. And so, no, I wouldn't mess with the timeline. But that's usually when I'm being tongue-in-cheek. If I actually answer that question honestly, I talk about how I would have wanted to learn to revise earlier than I ended up doing. But that's not what set me thinking this time. What set me thinking was about the idea of opportunity cost. When people ask me, what would I change? How would I like my career to have been different? What things do I miss? I've been thinking about opportunity cost a lot lately, particularly because my children are still wrestling with this concept, right? A few weeks ago, we went and did this haunted ski lift thing that they have in the mountains here. It's very fun. I like to do it. You get a big thermos of hot chocolate you sit on the ski lift, and then people make weird noises at you as you go up and down. Works very well for when you're social distancing because you're always quite a fair distance away from them. And my son Joel, who's 13, could not decide if he wanted to go or not because he realized he could stay home and he could play video games instead. And there was a game he was really interested in playing. And he wrestled with this decision to an extent that was kind of strange to us adults. We're like, come on, just go with us. We're going to the thing. If you want to stay, fine, make the decision, but just make the decision. And he had so much trouble. And I remember that when I was young. I remember that fear of missing out, that idea that I can't have both of these things at once. What is the right answer? And coming to understand that there are a lot of questions for which there is no right answer, or perhaps there is no way to know the right answer yet, because, the events haven't happened yet. Obviously, if he started playing his video game, the internet went out and he couldn't play it anymore, he will have wished to have gone on the ski lift. But if he picks the ski lift and then we get in a car wreck, he probably would have preferred to stay at home. But in most cases, there's not a right answer to that question, even after having gone through it. It's just about making the call in the moment. Now, this is not that difficult a concept to deal with. We wrestle with this a lot. As we grow up, it's one of the things that we have to figure out is how to make decisions. And for the most part in my life, this decision-making process has gotten easier and easier. I've learned to stop stressing the little questions so much. And if I order a meal and I don't like it and I wish I'd gotten the next one, well, I'll just chalk that up to next time to order the other thing. But there is one question that the older I've gotten, the more difficult the opportunity cost has become to me. And that question is, what should I write next? This is a very, very difficult question for me nowadays. When early in my career, it was not. It was very easy. I wrote whatever I was excited about, right? And particularly early in my career, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, I just kind of had to write. It didn't really matter what I was writing. But these days, I'm coming to realize, that every story I choose to tell basically kills 1,000 other ones. And this is growing intimidating. There's nothing I like more about being a writer than the idea of taking the blank page and making something out of it. People often ask me, what is the most fun part about being a writer? I usually joke, it's the fact that I get to get up at noon and go to bed at 4, right? I really do like that. I am a night owl. But the truth is, one of my favorite aspects, genuinely, is being able to essentially create something out of nothing. I know it doesn't work with the actual physics, but it feels like I'm combating entropy when I am taking a blank page and, completely formless ideas and turning them into a novel. Granted, I'm not actually doing that because I'm increasing the heat in the universe and propelling us ever toward the heat death of the universe, but in my brain I have made something out of nothing. It's like a magic trick, right? One of the fun things about being a writer and artist is that you could legitimately lock me in a room with a blank notepad, walk away and come back, and then there would be a book. And probably a lot of mad ravings, depending on how long you left me. But I really like that about my job. But at the same time, that blank page is intimidating. Not in the way that it is, I think, for a lot of new writers. The blank page intimidates new writers because they see how much work there is to do. The blank page intimidates me because as soon as I start writing, as I set something to those pages, that means I am locked in to another story. And for the most part, these stories are going to take between 6 months and 18 months of my life to create. And there's only so many of those one person can do in their life. Life has been kind of hard lately for a lot of us. Things have been really kind of weird. Instead of a massive, cool release party at a convention center, we get to sit here with almost everyone but me wearing masks, having to deal with a release party where technical difficulties are making it difficult even for the people who wanted to watch us to be able to do that. Life is kind of frustrating these days. And so I was thinking about my talk and about this idea of opportunity costs. And I thought, the thing I really want to do tonight is I want to take a retrospective of my career so far, and I want to talk to you about the books that didn't make it. Multiple books that never got published that I worked on, some of which I finished, some of which I didn't, and kind of use each of these books as a way to talk about how I chose what projects to work on at that point in my life. And we're going to kind of approach 4 different parts of my career this way. And so the first one we'll do in a minute. But we also are going to break these up so I'm not blamming at you the entire time with some questions. So I'm going to have Isabel come over here and bring us our next 2 questions, which I'll answer before I get into era 1 of the Brandon career. So, question is, how do you feel about the release of Rhythm of War? Is it different from how you felt about releasing any of the previous Stormlight books? Well, yes, the release party in particular is very different. I will admit I miss the big party. What I don't miss is the fact that Isaac and I usually leave those big parties at around 5 in the morning, having signed straight from like 10 o'clock until 5 a.m. And even doing that, we only get to a fraction of the people who come to the release party because we pre-signed the books, but this is for personalizations. And granted, I stay up until 4 o'clock, so going to bed at 5 or 6 or whatever, not a big deal for me, but man, is that part of it exhausting. And so not missing that aspect of it, though I am missing the enthusiasm of the crowd and being able to see you all and being able to hand you all your books because we're having to deal with shipping. And I know some people are going to get lost or not get there in time. By the way, Kara, someone was watching the sped up time lapse of us signing and found a book that I forgot to sign.
Oh my goodness.
They pointed it out and said, he didn't sign that one. It's one of the ones I drew a picture on, and I didn't drew a signature. So if you get the one I didn't sign, I drew a picture but did not sign, you may send that back to us, and we will sign it and send it back to you. Or you could just ask us to send you another one. We'll figure it out. But sorry, and eagle-eyed person, good job. But regardless, I do kind of miss that. I really don't miss the tour. And so flying around and things like that, this is why I called you guinea pigs, because I think that we are going to be experimenting with this and hopefully be doing something more like this for future releases. Probably with a big release party and a large crowd, but also streamed with Adam's excellent practice at streaming and things like that around to the world. Anything else about the release of Rhythm of War? That is different. We are getting to near the end of the first arc of the Stormlight Archive. And this book is kind of a different turning point for the series, for reasons you'll understand as you're reading the book. The first 3 books, which were the Kaladin, Shallan, Dalinar books, were in many ways much better formed in my head when I started. And in particular, the last 2 books had a lot of things get changed during the course of the first 3 books. And so while I'm very confident in the book now, during the beta read, there were just a lot more things that came up that I wasn't anticipating. That happens in everyone, but in this one it felt like there were a few extra ones. So I don't know. I feel really good about the book, but man, it was a lot of work. I think this was the most work we've put into a Stormlight book. It might only feel that way because we had the Kickstarter going on at the same time. Let's do the other question on the back of that one. Thank you, Isabel. Is there only one Scion for every given Aeon? Yes, there is. So, a good question. Now, there's only one Scion for every Aeon, but there are Aeons that you don't know about yet. So I'm going to move into part 1 of the reading group, and I'm going to sit down for this part, and so you can see the fire going beside me, and I'll be reading from my laptop here in a minute. But first, I want to look back at these early days and kind of talk to you about how I picked projects in the early days of my career. Back then, all I knew is that I wanted to be a writer for a living. I wasn't very good at this. I didn't know what I was doing. Really, I had no clue. And so I've often said that one of the first things I did is just write a bunch of different stories in a bunch of different genres. This was really good for me. A lot of writers I know kind of go into becoming a writer thinking they're meant to write one thing. Maybe it's because it's the popular thing, or maybe it's just because that's what their friends are doing. And then they experiment with different genres and find they have real talent in other areas. This happened to Dan Wells, who tried writing epic fantasy, and it felt, like he was pounding his head against the wall, he says, and then he tried writing horror novels, and they just worked so much better for him. And so I tried a lot of different things. And so this early part of my career, I just wrote. It was more important for me to tell stories than what I was telling. In fact, there's an interesting thing about this that I hope that you all get to experience someday, and it doesn't have to be with writing a book, but it comes down to finishing and doing something you thought was really difficult. My first book, White Sand, took me 3+ years to write. And before that, I had tried writing a novel as a teenager, and I had never finished it. It happens a lot when you're a teenage writer. But something very magical, pun intended, happened when I finished White Sand. Suddenly, this thing that in my head was this really, really difficult task that someday I would accomplish was done. I was a novelist. I had written a novel. It wasn't any good, but that didn't matter at the moment because I had actually accomplished it. And I think the single most meaningful moment in my career was not hitting the New York Times list or things like that, or even being called for the Wheel of Time, which would probably take second. The first most meaningful moment was realizing I could actually finish a novel. That changes, at least it changed my life, in ways that I just cannot calculate or explain. And I would hope that everyone has this experience with something. My wife ran a marathon, and running a marathon feels like one of these impossible things that I could never do. But yet she did it. And finishing a novel is the same way. As soon as I finished White Sand, my next book didn't take 3 years, it took 6 months. Because suddenly I had moved from a realm of trying this Herculean, impossible thing into being someone who had done that already and knew what kind of work and effort it took, and it was quantifiable to me. You'll find this amusing. The first time I got into a steady relationship, I had the same sort of emotional feel. I'm like, well, that wasn't actually so hard. I've been stressing about this for years and years and years, getting a girlfriend, and now I have one, and I'm like, wow, that actually can happen. And my whole life changed, and from then on, I generally was dating somebody, right? It was no longer this impossible thing that could never happen. It was something that could happen. Same thing with a book. And so during those early years, my mind really started to flood with possibilities. Once I'd finished that book, once I'd finished White Sand, I'm like, well, what else could I do with this? What else could I write? What else should I try? And so my early books, I wrote 2 epic fantasies, which were really the same book. White Sand got long enough that I felt like it was an ending, and I just kind of ended it. And I wrote a comedic fantasy in kind of the Bob Aspirin vein, and I wrote 2 science fiction novels. And I'm going to read one of these to you today. I'm going to read from my 5th novel, which I had named The Sixth Incarnation of Pandora, which is a very weird and clunky title. I was not terribly good at titles back then. But one of the reasons I'm going to read to you this is because I don't think I've ever done a reading from this before in my life, which is kind of cool to think about. And another reason I wanted to read to you is there's actually a scene from this. I picked this scene from the book specifically because when I was working on Rhythm of War, I was writing a scene and I'm like, I have written this sometime before. Where was this? Why? When was this? And I couldn't remember for a long time until finally it hit me. I'm like, oh, of course, it was from Sixth Incarnation. And so I'm going to read you the scene that has that same scene. Those of you who are beta readers who've read the book or employees who had it early, you'll be able to pick it out quite easily. So what is the Sixth Incarnation of Pandora? This is a story. You may think Pandora the planet because, of the movie. That's not what I was actually going for the myth that in this society we had opened up various Pandora's boxes, and this was in philosophy in the far future. The 6th one they'd opened was making people who were immortal. And this was a Pandora's box that they had philosophically opened. And it's a story, I often describe it as a cyberpunk. It's not actually a cyberpunk. It's not a true cyberpunk. It deals with some of those same themes. It has the kind of corporations in charge and kind of a dystopian future and things like this. But it is far future and not near future as most cyberpunk is. The story is about an immortal soldier who has been made immortal with this new process, which is still very rare and very expensive to do. And he is basically a one-person army with all of these modifications and things, and is capable of destroying entire armies on his own, and is completely indestructible. I'm going to read to you from chapter 1, which is not a good chapter for introducing that concept, but I was still learning how to write. You'll also notice that I did description back in the day a little bit more differently from how I do it now. I maybe lingered a bit. I maybe had a little bit more Robert Jordan's influence on me. I actually trimmed out about half the description in this just to make it work. And so I'm gonna read to you from this for a little while. It has a little epigraph at the beginning, which I thought you guys would find fun because I use those quite a bit now, and I didn't earlier in my career. And this book is unpublished. This is book number 5, The Sixth Incarnation of Pandora. From the moment the first primeval Neanderthal picked up a sharp rock and used it to eviscerate his prey, man has sought ways to use his surroundings to augment his own abilities. Not that much has changed over the millennia. Peg legs have become prosthetic limbs, and spectacles have been replaced with cyborg optronics. But the main ideas remain constant. Displeased with what fate allots us, we bend nature before our will, becoming more than we were intended. Among all of God's creations, only man takes offense at his lowly state. Along with our drive to change ourselves, there comes with true human paradoxical form the uncomfortable fear that we have gone too far. Through the ages, we have fabricated horrors to match our increasing supremacy over nature. Monsters, golems, mad robots, and horrors haunt our collective technological unconsciousness. Twisted mixes of flesh and metal, obscene misuses of nature and her creations. We push ourselves to be better and better, more in control and dominant. But at the same time, we sweat and worry that this time we have gone too far. We finally have. I am the final step, the ultimate synthesis of what is natural and what is profane, one last grand adulteration. I am the culmination of our fears, of Frankenstein's monster for the modern 23rd century. I am without parallel in life or imagination. I am Zelian. I got a lot pithier at making my epigraphs, I feel, as time progressed. Chapter 1. The forest's silence was abnormal, almost uncomfortable. Zelian could feel the dew in the air. It hung as an unseen mist around him. Humidity was an unfamiliar companion, and he had to fight the impulse to wipe his brow. A damp, sweat-stained hand would do little good in drying a damp, sweat-stained forehead. He could feel the soft film of water on his skin, coating his entire body, making his fingers both slip and stick as he rubbed them together. Also unfamiliar was the forest's shadowy illumination. Light he knew, darkness he knew. The forest's unchanging twilight, however, was neither bright nor dark. It seemed to flow rather than shift, live rather than just illuminate. It was neither day nor night. It was light undead. Zelian followed no marked trail. He had left that behind long ago. It was not difficult to move through the brush. Tall trunks stood like jealous merchants, catching the golden light long before it hit the ground. What little light did pass through was formless and impotent. Few plants could squeeze enough life out of such meager helpings to survive. There were ferns, weeds, and the occasional sapling, but nothing so thick he couldn't walk through it without trouble. Occasionally, Zelian reached out to brush a patch of soft, damp earth. It was odd that something native to his home planet would feel so alien to him, but it had been a long, long time since he had seen soil. He continued on, making good time through the realm of the enormous trees and their tiny fungal blooms. He usually only noticed his surroundings if something was wrong. The forest was different somehow. It was pervasive, omnipresent. Even if he closed his eyes, he could feel it around him. When he stepped, he would sense the soft, springy loam. With each breath, he drew in the odors of wood, decaying flora, damp foliage, and bitter earth. He could hear the crackling of leaves and twigs beneath his feet. Not sure how that happens when it's obviously so damp, but you know. The forest was not a setting, it was an experience. There's early Brandon's descriptions for you. No bugs, a voice in his head pointed out. What? Zelian asked, opening his eyes. No insects, Zelian. A forest this size should be brimming with them. They would be too hard to control here, Wire. I know, I just think it hurts the authenticity. You wouldn't say that if you could feel it, Zelian responded, continuing his hike. Well, I doubt that's likely to happen anytime soon. Wire's voice wasn't sarcastic or even depressed. It was simply stating a fact. Wire could never feel the forest, just as he could never feel anything. The entirety of the AI's physical being consisted of a CPO embedded beneath Zelian's left shoulder blade. We're running out of forest, Wire pointed out. Zelian nodded. He could see the tree line now where the forest ended. A few moments later, he passed through it, and the world around him transformed abruptly. Instead of soft earth, his foot snapped against rigid metal. He stepped out of the land of half-shadows into full daylight. The humidity disappeared, abandoned in favor of a carefully controlled, deliberately comfortable climate. Zelian left behind the canopy of leaves, entering a world where dark space extended forever in all directions. He stood on the edge of a sheer drop-off. The metal pathway that ran around the forest was only a few feet thick here, where he stood. It also bordered the edge of the platform. Zelian looked up. High in the sky, he could see another enormous platform, like the one on which he now stood, a floating continent with people inhabiting all of its 6 faces. Beyond the second platform, Zelian could make out the tiny pinpricks of stars. Looking down over the edge of the cliff, he could see the exact same thing. Hundreds of kilometers below lay the bottom of the platform, and beyond that was nothing. Cold space, eternity. Fall off this cliff, and one could literally fall forever. Said that the platform's builders had tried to make it seem as if one were standing on the surface of a planet, instead of a gargantuan block of metal hanging in the middle of space, a ridiculous distance from any planetary system. They hadn't done a very good job. Zelian took one look back at the forest park. Really, it was one of the few places on Sag platform that was dedicated to reminding its inhabitants of their heritage, as if they hadn't intentionally abandoned such things as forests when they moved into the sterile vacuum of space. Remind me to come back here when this project is finished, he asked. Is that a request, Zellion, or are you simply waxing hypothetical? No, really, remind me. Yes, Zellion. Wire would compute a likely date and time for the reminder. Zellion turned away from the organic wall behind him and stepped off the cliff. He could feel the fall begin, the plummet that would carry him down along the side of the platform until he entered oblivion. Gravity would drag him downward, prepared to hurl him into the void. But then it changed. His foot got caught in an unseen force, a pull that altered his momentum. His body followed, collapsing to the arms of the same force. Instead of plunging into space, Zellion swung in an arc around the edge of the cliff, his foot planting itself on the vertical wall below him. He reoriented himself, then pulled his other foot to sit beside its mate. He now stood on the other face of the cliff. What had once been down was now directly in front of him, and he turned around and looked down. He saw the space he had left, and it looked like a sheer vertical drop, the forest seeming to sprout from the side of a cliff. The platform's gravity wasn't going to relinquish its grip on Zellion quite so easily. It pulled one down against the platform, no matter which direction down happened to be at the time. One could walk on each of the platform's faces and feel as if it were the surface of a planet. I don't see why you have to be so dramatic about that, Zellion, Wire chimed in. What do you find so fascinating about changing gravitational surfaces? Zellion continued to look over the side of the ledge, then tossed a small pebble over, watching it arc normally in the air for a moment, then change vectors suddenly to fall inward, snapping against the pathway and rolling to a stop at the edge of the forest. Is there anything we haven't mastered, Wire? Zellion responded. What is left to dominate? The very laws of nature bend before us. Where is the excitement in a universe that behaves according to our convenience, warping and changing until it twists to the will of the most fickle species? If you want excitement, you should try piloting a ship through the center of a star, Wire suggested. As far as I know, no one has managed to conquer that realm yet. Maybe I will, Zellion mused. Just make sure you remove my CPU first, Wire said. So there we go. That is a look at how I was writing back 20 years ago. That was from 1999. At least that's what it said at the end of the book when I usually wrote the date that I was finishing it. So the sixth incarnation of Pandora. It is interesting also for me to look back and see which ideas I have thrown into the word chipper and recycled. If you've read Starsight, you'll recognize something very similar to those platforms, which stretch back to a short story that I wrote called Defending Elysium. And so they showed up probably first time here, and then I reused them for Defending Elysium, and then wrote the Skyward series in that same universe. So this is like a hypothetical book that could have existed in that same setting. Again, I think nowadays I might, if I were writing a book about a soldier that most of the book is action and explosions, I might have gotten a little faster to the actual action and maybe saved the waxing philosophical for another part of the story. But it is an interesting look back, in particular because this was book number 5 that I wrote. And I didn't do a lot of marketing those early books in my career, though I did take my second book, Star's End, and I did send it around. The first batch of books I ever sent out was Star's End, which I sent to an agent that I had met at a convention, who I later discovered was not really a real agent. It was someone from Denver, and I'm sure they're very nice people, but I sent it to them, and it got rejected. But part of me wonders what happened if I would have aggressively been submitting these early books. Is there a universe where Brandon sells Star's End, and then they want another science fiction, so he sells Sixth Incarnation of Pandora, and doesn't start the Cosmere? Because the Cosmere starts with Elantris, which was book number 6. Though I wrote Elantris not really having the Cosmere in mind, the real development of the Cosmere happened in books called Dragonsteel and Aether of Night, which were unpublished books during that era. So it's kind of interesting to imagine if I had become a science fiction writer instead, what would have happened? Would there have been no Cosmere? Hoyd wasn't in any of these early books. I wasn't doing that back then. The first appearance of Hoyd anywhere in any of my books is in Elantris, where he shows up. And then Dragonsteel, which was his backstory. So it's just interesting for me to think about opportunity cost. We are going to go do a couple more questions, and then I'm going to go into the second part where we'll talk about a different era of my career, and then after that, it's going to be Isaac's turn to entertain you for a little while. So come on up, Isabel. Of all the magic systems, would Awakeners be able to most quickly be able to utilize acquiring a Dawn Shard? Raffo! I saw this one early on, and I thought you deserved your Raffo. So let's turn that one around. Raffo, for those who don't know, means read and find out. It is a phrase I inherited from Robert Jordan, which means I am not going to tell you right now. It could mean that the answer is too much a spoiler. It could mean that I just want you theorizing on this for a while. It could mean that I haven't decided yet. It could mean that I got stumped by the question and don't want to answer it because I don't want to look dumb. Those are all equal answers. Actually, there's a fifth one, which is the Peter and Karen know the answer to this. It's in the notes somewhere, and I don't want to say until I can open the notes or ask them. So those are all valid interpretations of Raffo. Most often it is the I don't want to answer right now because I worry it will spoil things or lock me in too much to things that I want to do in the future. Can a Radiant join multiple orders? This was not done in the past. Or become a squire of a different order. It is actually not impossible for this to happen. It simply was not done. And if Dalinar became a Lightweaver squire or had the Lightweaver honor blade, could he create the Roshar map himself? This is going to depend on factors. It is possible but highly implausible, following another highly implausible set of circumstances that would allow him to actually do that, though getting the honor blade would not be as difficult. Let's do one more of those, if you wouldn't mind, Isabel. Are any of your characters based on somebody you know? So a lot of my side characters are based on people I know. This is generally because it's fun to do what we call a Tuckerization, where we take somebody and put them in a small bit part in a story just to kind of have a cameo, right? A lot of horror writers will do this and then murder the person, right? Dan kills everybody in effigy in his books. It's very common. I just have people just get walk-on parts. So Mem is in, you're in the third book, right? So Mem, when you run into Mem, that's Mem's cameo. Bridge 4 is famously made up of a lot of my friends and family members. So, you know, you will find Leighton, who is my friend Alan Leighton, or Scar, who is my friend Scar. Ethan Scar's dead. And so those I don't quite count as basing a character on someone. It's more like giving a cameo to a friend. Just like if we ever film these things, we will try to get everybody who's in the company walk-on parts in the movies and things like that, so you can be in the background and be like, look, there I am! We'll let Mem carry along a basket of laundry or something like that. And maybe Isaac can be doing a map in the background. But actual based on people, oftentimes I will find some interesting attribute about somebody I know and be like, wow, that attribute spun off and built upon to become, could become a cornerstone of a character. I don't usually say that I'm basing a character on that person, but people do inspire characters. The most easiest one to describe would be Serene from Elantris, which was based on my friend, slightly on my friend Annie, who was a good friend at the time and constantly complained about the troubles of being a woman who is taller than 6 feet in our culture. There are all sorts of difficulties relating to that I had never even considered. Because Annie was about my height, right? I'm 6'1", or between 6 foot and 6'1". We're about the same height. And for me, it's like, great. Like, this is the perfect height for a guy. Just over 6 feet means that you can still shop off the rack. You can still fit in cars. My friend Ryan, who's Dre from Bridge 4, always complained that he can't quite fit in cars because he's 6'4" or 6'5", and there are some cars he couldn't fit in and things, and sometimes couldn't buy off the rack. I could at 6 feet, so I wasn't too tall, but I wasn't too short. You know, I just didn't have that sort of problem that comes along with being of a non-standard height in a culture that fixates perhaps too much on it. I would hazard to guess. And so I thought about that, and I'm like, that's a cool attribute to talk about that I've never done with a character. The rest of Serene is not Annie, right? The rest of Serene grew out of what naturally the story needed and who she was and things like that, but that one little part of Annie became part of Serene. So I do that quite often. If I find someone just has an interesting conflict in life, I will go ahead and steal that and build a character around it. So sometimes at writing conventions you see people walking around with t-shirts that say, "Be careful, you'll end up in my book." I've always thought that that was a nice t-shirt, and it is kind of a danger of knowing an author. All right. As the years of your career have progressed, as the world and your worldview has changed, has your Cosmere, your vision of a fantastic universe, become more defined and detailed, or has the picture become muddled by shifts in perspective? Most definitely the first. I wouldn't say that the Cosmere has become more muddled. The more I've written, the more I've experienced, the more detailed and more interesting I think it has become. And unfortunately, the more stories in it I want to tell, which comes back to the main theme of what we're talking about. And so thank you for that question, Isabel, and whoever gave it to us, because that's right on theme. So I'll go back, do a little bit more speech. No, we're going to do another reading before it's you, Isaac. Don't worry. There's 4 of these. So he's like, "Oh, is it my turn?" No, I'm going to talk more first. It's what I do. So we talked about that early part of my career. For those who don't know, I wrote 13 novels before I sold one. And the book I sold was Elantris. Fortunately for us all, because epic fantasy was my first love, and Elantris birthed the Cosmere, and so we are now here doing Stormlight because those terrible early books of mine didn't sell, so hallelujah. Probably the worst thing that could have happened for my career would have been if I would have sold one of those early books. I sincerely believe that. I want to talk to you a little bit about the middle portion of my career. Kind of is this the middle portion? The early part of my actual career. How about that? Because I sold Elantris, and that was one of those other big hurdles. The impossible thing that in the future, like someday I wanted to do, was someday sell a book. And when that one happened, I did not think, wow, that was easy. In fact, when that one happened, I was like on my knees saying thank you, because for those who don't know the story, I just got a voicemail from an editor one day who wanted to buy Elantris. I won't go into the whole story. You can watch it on my YouTube. I've talked about it. But I went through a hard part of my career, writing some books that I thought were kind of mediocre. And then I wrote Way of Kings, and then I sold Elantris. And suddenly, possibility opened again, right? Suddenly, I was a published novelist, and suddenly I could do whatever I wanted. And people would actually, it seemed, give me money for it. In fact, the next 7 books I wrote, which were Mistborn novels, Warbreaker, and 3 of the Alcatraz books, all sold like immediately. And each book I released with a little deviation with Mistborn that I'll talk about a little bit later. Sold better than the ones before. Everything was going great. And at this part in my career, I really started to think about what did I want the scope of my life to be. And this is the time. Emily, do you remember who was there with us? Were you even there? There was a dinner that I did at Outback Steakhouse where I told people for the first time about Mistborn being 9 books. It would have happened in 2005 or 2006, probably 2006. And I can't even remember who was there with me. Were you there, Isaac?
It sounds really familiar.
I feel like but I remember that one. And then shortly thereafter, early 2007, I showed you the outline for the Cosmere. Which you say you still have somewhere. We haven't been able to find it. But I sat down and I drew out kind of a visual of the Cosmere as I imagined it. This was when I was working on the Mistborn trilogy and hadn't written it yet. And we'll have to find that and see if we can publish it for people. You guys will probably find it interesting. I do know that Dragonsteel was 7 books in that outline, which I've since shrunk that one to 3 books because I've stolen so much for Stormlight. But it had Stormlight at 10 books, and Dragonsteel at 7 books, and Mistborn at 9 books. Well, Mistborn's probably going to be at least 13, and Dragonsteel's probably going to be 3, and that one would have had White Sand novels that eventually we were doing as novellas rather than as novels. So it's going to just be interesting for you guys to look at. It probably has 3 books for Warbreaker, which I now feel is probably 2, but we'll try to pop that out. But that was all during the 2006-2007 era of my life, when suddenly everything was working and I started to be like, maybe I can actually do this. Maybe I can make it bigger than just writing the novels. Maybe I can bring this whole thing together. And I remember talking to my editor, Moshe, about some of the things I wanted to do, and he said, wow, you're ambitious. And I hadn't yet told him about the 36-book outline that I'd just done for the Cosmere. This was just for pitching him on Era 2 of Mistborn. And I'm like, oh, Moshe, you have no idea. But it's actually kind of working. In that early part of my career, of my published career, things worked really well until The Liar of Partenell. And The Liar of Partenell is the first book that did not work of that career. I had this happen to me once before. It's book number 9. I call it Mythwalker. Pieces of it ended up being part of Warbreaker. But this was my 9th book. I had tried writing it, and something just had felt off. Honestly, at the time I thought, I feel like I'm repeating myself too much. There's something too similar about this story and the one I just finished, which was Dragonsteel. But either way, I'd given up on that book. The only book that I gave up other than that one in high school. Then I hit Liar of Partenell. This was my my second stab after Dragonsteel at a Hoid backstory. This takes place on Yolen, the kind of original planet in the Cosmere named after Jane Yolen, and was involving how Hoid became Hoid. And all of those things with many twists and turns that I am not at liberty to discuss because I still someday want to do this. But it bothered me a ton that the book was not working. And I soldiered through. I wrote the whole novel. It's 200,000 words long, which is about how long books that I wrote were back then. The long books were 200,000, and the short books were 50,000. Now the long books are 500,000, and the short books are 100,000. But, and the things that were 50,000 all just became novellas. But I finished it. I soldiered through, but the book just wasn't there. Now, I had also had this emotion before with Way of Kings Prime. But with Way of Kings Prime, I had always assumed I would find a way to fix it and release it. I just needed to do some revisions. Turns out I needed to rewrite the whole book from scratch, which is what I'm going to have to do with this one at some point. But I wanted to read to you from this book, from the middle of the book. Some of the early chapters I put up on my website. I don't know if we'll ever release this book for people to read. Some of the other ones, like Mistborn Prime and Final Empire Prime, we are going to release. Dragonsteel we're going to release. This one, I'm not sure which ideas will end up in the eventual Hoid backstory that I write. But there's a nice scene in here that is very indicative of kind of the things I do in writing, and it's indicative of this early part of my published career and the choices I was making. Because I was trying, at this point, to establish a legacy, right? I was trying to build something bigger than just a trilogy or some books or anything like that. I wanted the entire Cosmere to be a thing. And I think that is part of what really made this feel tragic to me, was the fact that I had such lofty aspirations, and then the book just turned out to be mediocre. It's not a bad book, it's just a mediocre book. It's probably the worst book I wrote during this era. Worse than Way of Kings Prime, for sure, and worse than the published books. And I couldn't stand for this important book to be mediocre. And so I never released it. but I'm going to read to you a story. So the lead up to this is in this world, there are two competing ecologies. There's something we call Fane and something we call Troon. And in this region, humankind, they basically can't live in the Fane ecology. There's something called skull moss that grows over everything and changes the plants. They become poisonous, and the animal flesh humans can't survive on. And so we are in a city that is surrounded entirely by Fane life. It's grown around, and there's a ring around the city. No one knows why. It hasn't taken over the city. And into this comes Midias, an apprentice light weaver, who has been tasked with helping the people of the city by a mysterious mentor figure that you're not going to find out about, but there will be some little clues. And he is brand new at this, barely knows what he's doing, and has been tasked with figuring out the mystery and trying to save the city before it falls to the Fane. He has entered the city, shown off some of his powers, had a different response from what he expected, and now he's found kind of a home in basically a soup kitchen for the poor that is run, that they're the people who let him in. So, this is from The Lyre of Partenel. I want an opportunity to perform a story for these people, Midias said. Rizal snorted. Like you performed for the king with that dragon today? Midias frowned. They stood in the kitchen amidst Rizal's bubbling pots, Kale dutifully stirring one to the left. The man hadn't needed to be asked. Already the room was beginning to fill with unemployed people. They sat, staring at their tables, waiting to be fed. How do you know about the dragon? Midias asked. Rizal dumped a handful of spices into one of the pots. It's all over the city, Jesk. I think it was incredibly poor taste to make the image eat an illusionary soldier. I did nothing of the sort. But you did create an illusion of a monster. Yes, Midias admitted. And now you want me to let you do something similar in here. Nothing so drastic, Midias promised. Just a simple story. Why? I thought you were here to save the city or something. I'm working on that, Midias said. In the meantime, I'd like to tell a story. I think it might help these men lift their burdens. Rizal stopped pouring spices. She folded her arms, looking up at Midias. Look, Lightweaver, she said. You think your lies are going to make these men happy? You think you can feed their children with a story? The Jesks failed us. Your master, he failed us. Wait, when was this? Before, Rizal said, waving a hand. When Torag took control from Theos' father. The Jesks tried to placate the people, tried to tell them that a new age was coming. They spoke of art and beauty. And you know what? Their king couldn't feed us. People starved by the hundreds. Why do you think we turned to Theos? Midias' frown deepened. He knew the story, the history, differently. Torag had killed Theos' father, true, but it hadn't been the Jesks' influence that had caused the problems during Torag's singular tumultuous year of rule. It had been the lack of alliances, poor trade instincts, and general unsettlement in the city. And yet, the Jesks had supported him. That was part of the reason Theos had exiled them. Still, Rizal's version was skewed, or perhaps Midias' was. His master had taught him the past was very difficult to pin down. As fluid as river waters, he'd called history. Wet paints on a tapestry, mixing and melding in liquid form, creating images and scents that never remained stable. Rizal, Midias said, you suffer the philosophers, even though I can tell you think their talk is frivolous. Well, even if you see my stories as frivolous, I ask you to let me tell them. Bah, you're as bad as that God speaker, always pushing me to do things. Fine, tell your story, but only after you've served food during the beginning rush. Very well, Midias said, though I do wonder why we even do it this way. Wouldn't it be faster to have the men line up and pass through to get their soup? These men spend all day waiting in line, Jesk, she said. They wait for hours, standing in the sun, hoping to be one of the few that gets a chance to work. I don't intend to make them wait here, too. Get to work. Midias took a stack of bowls and moved over to Kale's cauldron, filling 2 of them. You're good at getting what you want, Jesk, the soldier said. Midias shrugged. I would have thought that you'd be poor at that after living so long alone in the forest. I wasn't alone in the forest, Midias said, taking the bowls and turning. I had my master. It wasn't really an answer, but Midias didn't feel like giving the real answer. He'd always been good at making things he wanted happen. It was just the way that life was. The world worked as he wanted, save for the notable exceptions. Midias didn't let him dwell on that, however.
He mourned over his master's death enough. He moved about, delivering bowls of food to the men. Even after only one day in the kitchen, the work became rote to him. That left him to think and consider, trying to decide the best story for the situation. His opportunity came soon, the tide of hungry men slowing. Medius approached Rizal, setting down an empty bowl, and met her eyes. Behind him, the sounds of dozens of wooden spoons scraping ceramic bowls echoed in the chamber. Rizal turned away and waved an indifferent hand. So, Medius turned and felt the increasingly familiar flutter in his chest. He grimaced. A man who had killed as many shouldn't feel such nervousness. And yet there it was, perhaps a sign that he was more human than he'd often give himself credit. "I've tried speaking about history," he announced to the room, "and I was ignored." Some of the eating men paused, glancing at him. It was easy to make his voice carry with so few people talking. "I've tried showing a monster, but I got the wrong reaction from that. I've caused enough fear in my life, and I did not come to Partenell to bring more." Medius put his hand out to the side and dropped a handful of dust. He wove the light into an image of a beautiful blonde woman wearing a blue crown. "So," Medius said, sitting back on a stool, "today I'll try a romance." Many of the men perked up at the appearance, though not a few muttered instead. I honestly don't know a lot about romance myself, Medius said, tossing a handful of dust to the other side, weaving the light into the image of a princely man with a copper crown. "But then neither have I ever met a dragon, but I can craft one from light well enough. Besides, I do know one thing. When it comes to romance, women are fickle, but men are fools." He smiled to the audience. Most of them watched him. However, they didn't respond as his master had indicated. When he called women fickle, he expected grunts of assent. And when he called men fools, his intonation should have garnered a few chuckles. He got neither. Medius moved on, throwing a handful of dust behind himself, weaving the light and blocking the sight of Rizal and her pots, instead creating an image of a richly decorated room, complete with a bronze-rimmed looking glass and deeply dyed rugs. "Now, this was a time before the coming of the Fane," Medius said. "Many of my stories are from that time. It does us good to remember that our lives were once more than they are now. Lily was known in 7 cities as the most beautiful to be born in some 100 years' time. Wives spoke of her when they washed clothing in rivers. Laborers passed news while they cut wheat in the field. Even children knew of Lily. Eventually, news reached Prince Helios, heir to the throne of Lion's Hill. Now, Helios was not a vain man, nor was he particularly demanding. He was, however, an inquisitive man. This news troubled him. What would the most beautiful woman in the world look like? How would she dress? What color were her eyes? How would she keep her hair? He asked after these things, but no one could give him a detailed answer. Another handful of dust produced a group of scribes and scholars speaking with Helios, who stood to his left. Lily, however, continued to comb her hair in the room to his right, looking into her mirror. It was a challenging illusion, and Medius felt himself being drawn into the image, transfixed by it. He found it hard to pay attention to the audience as he continued to speak. Helios determined that he would have to discover Lily's beauty for himself. Though his father, the king, objected, Helios left that day to ride for Nanhel, the fair woman's purported home. Helios's room dissolved and shimmered, transforming into an image of a prince riding on horseback. Even focused on the illusion as he was, Medius could hear cries of surprise from the men at the tables as they saw the prince riding atop a full-sized horse. The illusion remained steady, the horse staying in place despite its galloping, and Medius carefully added the faint sound of hoofbeats. Helios's road was long and hard, he continued, giving a slight image of rainfall to the illusion washing over the prince. And as he approached the city, Helios began to encounter crowds and large troops of men. He was not the only one who had come to see Lily's beauty. Indeed, from the processions he soon began to pass, he wasn't even the only prince who had come, though he certainly was the most poor and the most humble. He hadn't even brought a single manservant. His only companion was his trusted and aged bodyguard. What's more, so many had come to see this princess that they crowded in tents along the walls outside. Even every inn in the city was completely full, but Prince Helios was clever as well as inquisitive. He found an empty nook on the street, and there he began erecting a fine, expensive tent. The beggars who lived there were surprised to see one so rich pitching there, but the prince did not acknowledge them, instead chatting with his bodyguard and making up a story about how this street was the perfect location to view the princess when she went on her secret morning rides. Within a few hours, news had spread, and all imaginable kinds of people had crowded the street to stake a claim on space. Helios retreated to an inn and was able to get a room from one of those who had left in order to sleep on the street. As his faithful bodyguard bedded down on the floor, Helios sat by the window pondering, and he spotted an old woman walking among those in the street, saying something that seemed to make people there angry. Her attitude intrigued Helios, and he sent his guard out to fetch the old woman. Midias threw out dust in front of him, creating the image of the old woman. He was completely engrossed in his own telling, prepared to move on to the old woman's warning that Princess Lily was cursed. As he began this part, however, the illusion wavered, Rizal cautiously poking through, causing a shimmering of sparkling dust to fall to the ground and shatter the back wall of Helios's room. Midias blinked, brought out of his own story enough to again become aware of the audience. Many of the men were muttering loudly, and some had left the room, leaving their soup behind. Midias shook his head, coming conscious again, his illusion disintegrating, people, objects, rooms, melting down into bits of dust. "You've had your chance, Jesk," Rizal snapped. "Stop frightening these men away." "But the story." "They don't care about your story, Jesk. Lies and feign illusions. What good are they?" "Feign illusions? You think what I do is feign? Well, it's not natural, I'll say that." Midias looked around, sensing the hostility in the faces of the watching men. Embarrassed, he stood, the last of his illusions exploding into dust behind him. Then he rushed from the room, moving to his chambers. Once there, he threw a handful of dust against the wall, summoning his master's figure. Midias' room was dim, since he'd brought no candle. Yet the aged light weaver formed from the dust, sitting on Midias' bed. "You lied to me," Midias said. "Well, I am a liar," the master said. "So are you. We don't lie about important things. All of our lies are important. You know that." Midias turned away. "They were supposed to welcome my stories. How often did you mention the joy that men find in storytelling? How often do you talk of lies and their power to bring emotion? They were supposed to love me, not revile me. Is that why you're here, Midias? To find love?" Midias glanced at his master. "So I should stop? Focus only on the corrupted?" "Ah, lad, saving Partenil involves so much more than simply stopping the corrupted. These people, they live, but they no longer remember why. They eat with dull stares. They work the fields without laughter. They return home to their families worried and frightened that they'll get sick, or that they will lose a child to the year of sacrifice, or that the Troon ring will finally collapse and leave them all without a home. There's little I can do about that. You can remind them that there is more to life than pain, fear, and sorrow. That's the true calling of a Jesk. You look to give them stories that have meaning, but the most important meaning of your lies has nothing to do with a moral. It has to do with the way that it makes people feel, not the way that it makes them think. They don't want to feel. If they can't see how it'll feed them or bring them wealth, they don't want it. They revile it. They call it superstition or foolishness. They care nothing for what I offer." "No," his master said. "They do care, but they're afraid. Midias, this thing that you do, it is a noble and grand work. When you tell a story, you make men see through the eyes of someone whom they've never known. When they hear the tale of a widow's pain, for a moment they are that widow. When they hear a child's play, they remember what it was to be a child themselves. When they see a hero win, for a short time, they succeed as well. They may have forgotten what this means, but that is part of being human. Your duty, then, is merely to remind them." And there we go. We'll stop there. That is from The Liar of Partenil. Wearing its moral a little bit much on the sleeve for a scene that was about not teaching with morals, I suspect. But that book failed, and I never released it. But someday, I will have something more for you along those same lines. Right now, I'm planning to write Hoyd's backstory after I finish Stormlight 10. So we've got a little bit of a wait first. I am going to break now and drink some water, and Isaac is going to take over, and he's going to talk to you about the art from this book, and I'll be back afterward with 2 more readings for you.
And we'll be back in a few minutes while you guys.
Okay, so we're going to blank the screen for a few minutes while we set up, but we will be back, so don't go anywhere.
All right, and we're back to the Rhythm of War launch event. I am Isaac Stewart. I am Brandon's art director at Dragonsteel Entertainment. He tells the stories tonight. Tonight I show the pictures. Together we are one Lightweaver. Some other things I do at Dragonsteel is I design the books. I help with some of the merch as well. We all wear different hats. If you catch us sometime, we can tell you about it. So hopefully everybody has their books in hand now. I want you to pick it up, take a good look at it, okay? Everything in that book had to be designed in some way. It had to have some kind of blueprint put together before we created it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we go from point A to point B. Not the writing part, not the editing part. We're going to focus on the art. First off, I do want to give Tor a big applause. They listened to what we asked them to do on the book, and it turns out beautifully. They let us put tons of art in this. They let us create a book that is unlike your normal hardcover books that you get at the store in many ways. So big round of applause, please, for Tor. All right, so where did this start? It was early 2019, and Tor comes to Brandon and me and sends an email and says, hey, Brandon's going to write Stormlight. He's going to start Stormlight 4 this year. What's going to be on the cover? So each week, Brandon and I have an art review for about half an hour, and we talked about that. What is going to go on this cover? We need to write up a description. We use our experience from the previous covers, and we come up with something. What locations have we shown? Which characters have we shown on the covers? And we narrowed it down to this time, Shallan and Shadesmar. We thought this is the cover that we want. We haven't seen Shadesmar before on a cover. We haven't seen Shallan. And we're going to put this on the screen. This is the first one. This is what we sent to Tor. Shallan in Shadesmar, holding her shard blade. Around her are crystalline trees. The book underneath the dust jacket will be purple to match the Order of Knights Radiant in the book. So using purples in the obsidian-like stone and trees might be nice. So that was the description that we sent. And a little while later, once this description got sent to our overseas partners and things, I got an email from Petar Penev in Bulgaria. He's an artist, and he said, hey, Shallan can't have a shard blade in Shadesmar. So thankfully, we have people looking out for us, and we adjusted that to just have Shallan and Shadesmar. And I'm glad that we were saved from that sort of duh moment. So we talked to Michael about that, and then we send Michael some things. Michael Whalen, who did the beautiful cover that we have. I hope that all of you have been able to go and watch the interview that we posted on the YouTube channel. If you haven't, go take a look at it sometime. We send him a cover template. And Adam, will you put the cover template up? And we're just giving our best guess. Where is the text going to be? We know where Brandon's name's going to be. And we just kind of put the title on there, how it might look. I send that to Michael so he can start sketching up ideas within that. We don't want to wind up having to adjust the art later for the text to fit in there. So it's good to have this from the beginning. Also, very early on in the process, we decided to involve Ben McSweeney because he has worked with Michael before doing concept art, and that was very helpful. Michael said, let's go ahead and get him involved. And Michael said it would be good for us to send him some thumbnails. And the way that this would help, this is thumbnails of what the cover could be. Shallan and Shadesmar is what we gave as the concept. How might this play out in grayscale thumbnails? We do this to explore dead ends so that Michael can see these and say, oh, I don't have to go down that avenue, and he can expend his time working more on the thumbnails and the process or the the concepts that he thinks might pan out a little better. So Adam, if you'll bring up number 3 there. So number 3, we've got a couple of, and they're really rough. They're just grayscale. We've got a little tiny couple of pixels that represent Shalon, and then in the background we have a fortress that you see that wound up on the back of the cover. You can go to number 4. And this is Ben and me. We are just exploring different avenues of what the cover could be. We send them to Michael and let Michael use them as he would. At the same time, Brandon's writing the book. We're getting more and more scenes. So when more scenes come through with Shalon and Shadesmar, we're sending some of these to Michael. We're sending him pieces of the book as Brandon says it's ready to go. And we explored a couple of other ideas as well. Ultimately, Michael settled on the idea of Shalon on the front, Adolin on the back, with the fortress of lasting integrity also on the back. So knowing that Michael wanted Adolin and Shalon on this wraparound dust jacket, we again went to Ben and said, Ben, let's do some concepts of Adolin and Shalon. What is their clothing like? What is their traveling clothing like? Michael asked us for this because, again, it helps him make sure that he's providing a vision that we are looking for. And, of course, he does his own take on this as well. So let's put some of those up. So we've got the first one here is a concept of Shalon, I believe. I don't have it right here in front of me. I should just pull them up, huh? And that's what we sent to Michael. Next we have the one of Adolin. And you can see that we tried to slip a sword in there again because we wanted a sword somewhere on the cover. So we're like, hey, Adolin can bring a sword. So those are our costumes right there. I think ultimately Michael hit a home run with this cover when he used all of these elements, he put it together. There were a lot of back and forth where in art review I'd show Brandon the progress, we would give some feedback or make some comments, and Michael was just great. As an aside, the cover is available right now as a print over on his website, so go take a look at that. We have a video from Michael where he talks about his process working with us a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about what your process was like working with Tor and with us, Dragonsteel, on this cover? What was our process for coming up with the final product here?
Well, I get a partially finished manuscript, and because my schedule is so, I get booked up in advance so much, it's not. And plus, Irene, the people at Tor know that I'm so bad with deadlines that it's important to get something to me, get me working on something as early as possible. So often I'm working using maybe the first half or 2/3 of a manuscript on a book, and it's a first draft at that. So there's so much in your books that I don't need more than that to get me going, for obviously. But there's actually, I know it's easy for artists working in my field to complain about art direction. But if you want to know the truth, with Brandon's books, I could use a lot more art direction. If I was told, we want to see something on chapters 2 or 3 or 13 and 12, that would make my job a lot easier, because there's so much to consider in these books, so many possible avenues an illustrator could go down, and so many story arcs and character tracks and plot tracks that are going through the narrative. It's I find it overwhelming, and I find myself illustrating a lot of things or drawing a lot of things in my sketchbooks or whatever that don't end up in the final painting. It's never something that I regret, because the fans have been very generous in wanting to own them, and it's something I can develop for my own pleasure and sell at a convention or art show or on my website or whatever. But in terms of getting the painting done on time, I think I could actually use even more art direction. And the thing about Dragonsteel and Tor is that you guys have been almost totally hands-off about, I've never had so much creative freedom on a project as I've had working with you on this. And I really appreciate your willingness to let me kind of have my head on where I'm going on these things. But after I come up with the initial landscape concept, then there's a lot of back and forth between Dragonsteel and me. And Tor has been, like I said, almost hands-off in that regard, and letting us communicate directly, which is such a rare thing. Maybe it's more common these days, but in the 80s and 90s, I had to fight with some of the book companies I dealt with, trying to seek input, get input from the author on how to correctly visualize a particular character or scene in a book that I feel would be important to have on the book cover, and which I've never understood because it seems very counterproductive to me. But anyway, it hasn't been an issue with Tor books or with Dragonsteel. So it's been extremely helpful for me to see Ben McSweeney's visualizations. He's been an enormous help for me. And if I had to come up with some of the plant forms outside of seeing where he was going with them, I feel that I would have really gone astray. And his visualizations, which I think are so spot on and have been done in collaboration with Brandon, are an invaluable guide for me. And I can take them and then kind of run with them and even carry them a little further in a direction that I think would be evocative of the landscape and the story. But that's been an invaluable aid for me, and something that I appreciate very much. It's been great, wonderful experience.
And I think that Michael deserves a huge round of applause for doing these. I have found that he's not just an amazing artist, he's also an amazing individual, and we are so grateful to have him on Team Stormlight, basically. So let's move on here. So let's rewind back now to March 2019 again, because a lot of things we had to put a lot of things in place from the beginning there. Brandon began writing the book, and we decided to get a head start on the art. He already had in mind some of the things that we needed. He wanted 9 Shalon pieces of the Radiant Spren that help make Knights Radiant. So the first thing that we had to do was go and find out about all the Radiant Spren and which ones we knew a lot about and which ones we didn't know a lot about. Karen, our continuity editor, was very helpful in this and compiling a lot of this information. A lot of the information we wound up using to make the Knights Radiant quiz that we released later in the year, this year. So we started gathering this all together, and the ones we didn't know a whole lot about, we just kind of left till the end so that Brandon could write the book and fill in some of those details as he went writing the book. We've got Ben McSweeney in again, who does the Shalon sketchbook pages in every book, and he has done an excellent job with the Spren pieces, and we're going to start showing a few of those. There was an interview with Ben a little bit earlier where he goes through the process of how we did the cultivation spren, the honor spren, and the ash spren. But we're just going to show all 9 of these and talk about them a little bit. So, all right. So the first ones here that we have a mist spren, the cryptic, and the ash spren. Some of these we talked about earlier in the video with Ben. But these were a lot of fun to put together. I will say that it was interesting. On each time I would bring these into art review with Brandon, and we would discuss where do we want this to go. And sometimes Some of these hit the mark right away, and a few of them, it took a few iterations to get them to the point where it felt more like what Brandon wanted. It was fun to also see, as Ben was drawing his cryptic drawings, to see other fan art out there that was hitting the same thing. And I've noticed this with Brandon's art a lot, or Brandon's writing a lot, that he can write something and several different artists can interpret it in different ways, and yet you know exactly what it is. And I think that is a testament to the details that he chooses to give us, that evokes something that we can all kind of concretely see very similar things. If we move on to the next page, we have the Honor Spren, who they have a big part in the book, and we've seen Honor Spren for a really long time. So for Ben to start fleshing this out was a lot of fun. Then we have the Cultivation Spren with a little bit of the sort of Wendell-looking character down at the bottom. I'm just showing off art here. And one of the things that I really love about this is Ben was able to give each of the kind of the cultures of Spren a different sort of clothing or in a different sort of look that evokes this bigger society behind some of these things. And I just really, really like some of that stuff. Let's go on to the next one. My favorite one of these, I think, is the simplest one. For some reason, it's the High Spren. And they look like tears in reality that look out on unfamiliar starry skies. And I just think those are so cool. Next, we have the Peak Spren that look a little bit like the Unkalaki in their clothing and in their designs. And then the Ink Spren, which I think is kind of fun. He did a little drawing there at the bottom that looks like Yasna's, the side of Yasna's face with her ink spren sitting there. So Ben did a great job on these. It's great to have him on the team. Now let's move on. So another thing that we knew we were going to need were end papers. And this is still, the book's being written, I have to get end papers going. You know from Oathbringer that we have started this series of heralds that, Brandon, you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but you kind of got this idea when he went to the Sistine Chapel and saw the different renditions of the apostles. They're kind of this the prophets, thank you. The different prophets and the different symbols that went with each of the prophets. And he thought, let's do something like that for Roshar, but with the heralds. And so we dreamed up this gallery of 10 paintings by different artists that presumably would be in-world Rosharan artists painting this for a gallery somewhere. And part of that idea was that we would commission physical paintings so that we could hang them up somewhere. In the last book, we had Howard Lyon do 2 wonderful paintings. He's here with us tonight. We had Santos do 2 wonderful paintings as well. For this next book, I wasn't exactly sure which heralds we were going to put on the end papers. And so I commissioned the remaining 6, not knowing exactly what we were going to put in the book. Many of you might remember when we revealed Donato's wonderful Taln herald and wonder, why is that not in the book? It's just that once we got all the heralds in, it just felt like that one needed to be saved for the next book. The same thing with Miranda Meeks. She is painting a beautiful herald for us, and we're going to save it for the next book and reveal it at a future time. For this one, I contacted Magali Villeneuve. I'm sorry that I'm saying, she is from France, and she is wonderful. Magali Villeneuve. I hope she's watching and can give me a thumbs up on that. So she has done some work previously for us in Warbreaker, where she did a beautiful rendition of Vivenna in the stone soldier's garden. I asked her if she would be interested in painting one of these heralds, or 2 of them, and she said, I only paint digitally. And I was kind of like, I really want Magali to do one of these for us. And so I dreamed up this crazy idea, and I talked to Howard, and I said, Howard, if I can get Magali to do digital versions of these. Would you want to paint our physical versions? And he gave me the thumbs up. We all got in contact with each other, and that's where we go ahead and. So what we have here is the Herald Paelia, who is the herald of the Truth Watchers, and Kelek. These are our front end papers. You've probably seen them now. You're holding the book. Kelek is in kind of the command position on this. You open the book, you see him right there, mainly because he is the Wheel Shaper Herald, and his glyph is on the front of this book. The book is purple. The cover is somewhat purple. We wanted to kind of keep that together there. So those are the digital versions, and tonight Howard is here to reveal the physical version that he painted for us and talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to give the floor to Howard for a few minutes here.
All right. Thanks for having me here. Feels good to take off my mask.
Sorry, 1 second, Howard. It's not taking up your mic for some reason.
Okay.
You want to see if the bottom is what you've got in the clip?
Feels like this secure.
I can give him mine.
Hold that in. Let's see. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm honored to be here tonight and talk a little bit about the art, or at least this particular painting. If you want to bring that in now, that's great. Let's see if we can lean it up against that stool. Do you want to put it there? All right. I can hold it up. Okay. I'll step off to the side. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the normal process of creating an illustration. And just to quickly go over that, you're contacted by an art director, and you do some little thumbnail sketches, and that's often the best part of the process. And you submit those to the art director, and they pick one that they like, and you develop that into a more finished sketch, and sometimes that's the best part of the process. And then you take that to color and work out all the values in the colors. And then you go through the process of actually executing the painting. And there's a lot of steps and a lot of work involved on that. And that's usually what you go through. There's a lot of work before you actually get to the final painting. Well, in this case, I didn't have to do any of that work. I had this incredible privilege, really the honor of working with Isaac and Magali to create this piece, or really to receive the concept from Magali and then be able to execute it in oils. And the images that she created were so beautiful that I really wanted to be true to her creation. And there's some subtle changes in it, but that was just the result of interpreting it, kind of reinterpreting her work. It's kind of like she designed this castle, quarried the stone, built it, put up the foundation, the timbers, and went through all of that work. And at the end, I got to walk up the stairs and put the flag on the highest, tower and say, "Look what I made." But in reality, she did an incredible amount of work for us to get to this point. I'll also quickly mention the frame by Masterworks Frames, who does an incredible job making the frames for it. When you, as an artist, often we will do studies of old masters' work. And when you do that, it's really like walking in someone else's shoes. You get to understand their sensibilities, their visual cues, their palette, the way they render things. And we don't do that as often with our contemporaries these days. So it was a real treat to do that with Magali's work and feel like I painted with different colors than I would normally choose, to work with a different palette and different visual sensibilities. And I learned a lot from doing that. I had the chance to paint a couple other heralds, and I wanted to do more, but I didn't get to be selfish with them. Brandon and Isaac rightfully wanted a lot of other artists to create heralds and bring their vision to them. So I felt, again, lucky to be able to touch my hand to a couple more heralds. So I think that's it. Let me hand this back to you, Isaac.
Thank you, Howard. So we have a video from Magali that she sent us talking about her process in working on this, and we can play that.
Hi, I'm Magali Villeneuve, and I'm one of the illustrators who worked on the Stormlight archive. So I'm really happy this project is being revealed now and that I'm able to talk about it some more. So to make things short, there are two main reasons why I really did enjoy working on those two pieces. The first reason probably was the freedom of creation I was given by Brandon Sanderson and Isaac Stewart from the Dragonsteel team. They were really open to seeing what I would come up with, as long as I would respect, you know, such things like what the characters were supposed to be about, what they represented, and the symbols around them and all. But starting from that, I could really let my imagination run wild. And it doesn't happen all the time, you know, when you are working on illustrations. I'm more used to having really precise guidelines and precise assignments, texts. Here it was more about pure creation, and you know, they really wanted to know what would be my ideas, and I really want to thank them for that, because it was really fun and exciting and also challenging. So yes, it was a really great project. The second reason was that for the first time ever, I think, in my career, I got to work directly with another illustrator. And I think that's what really sold the project to me, was when Isaac told me it would be Howard Lyon. Well, needless to say, I've been following Howard's work for years, and I really do admire what he does, and his paintings really speak to me. So yeah, when I knew we would get to work together, I was totally, yeah, I'm on board, definitely. And I also think it was really good and unusual idea that the Dragonsteel people had, because, to put things in a nutshell, the deal was that I would first create designs for these two heralds and paint digital paintings, final paintings for them, and at the end Howard would get to do an actual painting for those pieces. And I've never seen that before, and I really was curious to see how, because, you know, our styles are a bit different, so I was really curious and also a bit honored to see Howard's painting. And when I saw the first one, I was amazed, and it was a really great moment for me, and I was really surprised by how close it was to my painting. I really did love that, so I hope you will as well. And yeah, thanks everyone, and thank you the Dragonsteel team. Bye bye.
Wonderful to work with, and I hope that we'll be able to show you more things from her in the future. If we go to the next image there, we're just going to show you a couple of close-ups of Howard's painting of Magali's Herald, and then let's talk about the back-end papers, which were done by Carla Ortiz. Carla Ortiz is known for magic cards and concept art for Marvel, among other things, and she is fantastic. She's a great artist. I was looking for an opportunity to work with her, and when these heralds came up, the heralds Nail and Chana, I couldn't think of anybody else to have do this, and luckily she said yes when we contacted her about that. She sent us a video, and let's play that.
So we started talking about working together earlier this year, I think. It's Isaac who hit me up. He's like, hey, Brandon would really like to work with you. I already knew about, the project because I've had friends of mine, illustrator peers who've worked on it before, and they sent me information on the characters, on where it was going to be published. It was going to be a special edition, kind of a big deal type of situation, but that they also wanted it to be done in oils. And to me, that was one of those things where it was a little nerve-wracking, because I don't often work in oils for clients. I normally work digitally. That's because with oils, oils just takes time. For example, to be able to photograph an oil painting well, there's only 2 times that you can do it. It can only happen when the painting is actually wet, freshly painted, or about maybe, depending on how thick, you paint, maybe about 2 weeks, a month, maybe 2 months before you're able to varnish it and properly, bring back the vibrancy of the oils. Otherwise, it pictures flat. It's horrible, and everybody's wondering, wait, do you really know how to do this? And you're like, yeah, you do. It takes forever. But they understood. I feel like Isaac and Brandon really both understood, what it's like to work in oils. They've done it before, and so I felt confident, moving forward with them on this. First, we started doing really solid sketches. I tried to make the sketches look as close as possible to the final as I could. Especially working with oils, you do not want midway through the painting to be like, hey, actually about this section, I don't know about it, maybe change it, and then you're just crying, cutting up the canvas in pieces. No, you can't do that. So you really, really want to make sure that you nail the sketch, that it's in the right direction, and that it's clear as possible so everybody knows where we're going. Once we got the okay for both characters, then, was able to start the project. The funny part, though, was that as soon as we started, getting ready for, actually doing the big oil paintings, that's around the same time as COVID-19 hit, and really started getting serious out here. And almost everything that could have gone wrong went wrong during that time. And just both in life and materials and just everything went crazy. But funny enough, the paintings became kind of a bit of a sanctuary for me. The big scary world out there was horrible, but oil painting and painting, Nail and Sharana, Shana, I never got her full name, so I'm so sorry, I'm horrible, please don't hate me. But anyway, so, getting Nail and Shana to look just like the characters, how Brandon envisioned them, to have, Shana's, motherliness and kindness show through, and to have Nail's, justice above all type of situation, personality show through. It was really important, and it became almost I wouldn't necessarily say obsession because that's not healthy, but obsession. But yeah, it was really fantastic to have that. It brought a lot of solace to be able to work on something that I know is loved by many, many people, and it became kind of like a little temple type of situation. They became my temple. And they were a joy. I don't often work on oils for, clients, but whenever I can, it's always a joy, and much more when they're cool characters. And I just hope fans like it. That's about it. That's all one can hope for, right? And, that you get to do more, because it's fun. All right, I think that's all I gotta say. Bye, friends.
So So Carla was wonderful to work with on this. She instinctively grasped the symbolism behind the characters, and I think that she did a great job representing them. We have a couple of close-up images that I want to show you of these, mainly because I want to show how she interpreted the spren. And so the first one here is on Chana. And she's painted Chana and when you see Nail, both very realistically. But if you look at the way that she's done the spren, she's done this in sort of a novel way where we've seen more literal interpretations. Now we're seeing an impressionistic interpretation of this. That's thick paint on there. I want to lick it. It's been in my office for weeks, and I will not lick it. I promise. Incidentally, if I ever write an autobiography, I want it to be called I Licked a Van Gogh. And I hope that I'm not writing it from jail. Let's go to the next one. So with Nail, the spren in this picture are more like splatters. They're blue splatters, very well-placed brush splatters on the, and I just love this, that it's this impressionistic take on the spren. And it works really well in world because I think artists in world would also wonder how do I interpret this aspect of my world, and that would be one way. All right, so next image. I get the manuscript, I read the whole thing, I make notes on it. On this one you can see where I'm starting to think about the redesign of the Stormlight symbol. Trying to simplify it because that was on my mind at the time. I've blurred out a lot of the manuscript here because I don't want to cause spoilers. But also you'll see down in here there's a little map that I've drawn that will later show up on one of the Navani sketchbook pages. I read the book and I start to map things out, which sounds really funny, but I map it out. And if we go to the book map here, I take every chapter in the book at least to the closest approximation, because some of these change a little bit as it's edited, and I put illustrations in the parts that I feel they're going to augment the story the best. I don't want to bunch up a bunch of illustrations at one point. I want to spread them out. I try to begin a part with an illustration if it's helpful. A map is a good way to begin a part sometimes. But once we get into part 5, when the climax starts, my rule is that I don't put anything in the middle of the climax that's going to stop the reading, because that's our Brandon avalanche at that point, and I do not want to get in the way of that. All right, so let's go to the next page here. So this is how we are starting the book. I knew a lot of the action was going to take place in Urithiru. We hired Ben McSweeney to do a picture of the atrium. We've seen the pictures of the outside of Urithiru. We added that one from Oathbringer because we felt like it was a good reminder of what had taken place in Oathbringer and what does Urithiru look like. It's not a standard city. We're going to need this throughout the book. And the atrium is so that we can see what does the inside of Urithiru look like. Let's give some more visual clues here. I work with Brandon also to know which are the next viewpoint icons, because sometimes there's new characters, and so let's fill that out with viewpoint icons. In this book we've had I'm all over the place. Sorry, tongue twister. We've seen Risen, we've seen Taravangian before. It was well timed that they got their own viewpoint icons. If we have that up. And then there's always a new flashback icon. And this provided a challenge to us because in this book we are seeing past from Eshonai and Venli, who both have their own icons at this point. And previously we would just do a inverse image of the character, of their character icon. In this case, we combined them together and did an inverse. And I feel like it brought out a nice combination there that works for the flashbacks. That's up on the screen right now. There's a few other new icons as well. One that Howard did that we wanted to put in Oathbringer, but we never found the place to do that. And so that shows up in this book as well. The next thing we do is an art log. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's an Excel spreadsheet. Kara's over here getting excited. It's a spreadsheet where I take that map that I drew out, I type it out, I send it to Tor so that their layout artists can figure out where everything goes in the book. Let's go to next, Santos. He did fashion plates for us. We decided in this book that we wanted for the fashion plates to be doing singer fashion. They have kind of risen to their own over the last 3 books, and now they are getting their own fashion. Do you have those up right now? So this is a difficult thing because the Parshendi, the singers, the listeners, we've read a lot about them. There's been a lot of fan art, but how do we interpret this in a way that's going to please everybody? And the answer is we can't please everybody. But in the end, I think this is a great interpretation of the singers. In the end, whatever is in your head is right for your story. Brandon is scripting this out for you. We're providing concept art, and you get to direct your version of the Stormlight Archive. But I think that Dan nailed this. The biggest thing that I came to Dan with on this was there needs to be some relatability to these characters. I want the viewers to look at it and say, I can relate with the listeners. I can relate with the singers. Last minute, Dan sent us a video, and I have not watched it. So this is going to be new for all of us. And I really appreciate Dan sending this, though. He really wanted to be part of this. He's been really busy with projects, and he's just been great to work with, as always.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Desantis, aka Dandos the Oil Sworn. I wish we could all be together for the release of Rhythm of War, but I guess this will have to suffice for now. Thank you all for being here. Isaac Stewart, the art director on this book, asked me to say a few words about my pieces in the book, which I'm really proud to be a part of again. The 2 pieces I have in A Rhythm of War are the ones you see here, which I'm sure Isaac will probably have in some sort of slideshow. And they really kind of started... they're continuing the idea of doing fashion plates that we had in the previous 2 volumes, which I had also done. And they were always conceived in black and white, and they're meant to kind of show whatever race that's in the book in their... just to help build up the world building and show their natural attire and slip it into the story somehow. And these 2 pieces actually kind of spawned from this Parshendi piece I did just for fun for myself. I was working on a piece for Isaac, and lots of times when I work on a painting, I kind of start to draw other unrelated things to it. And so in the case of this project, I was doing a painting of Kaladin. I kind of re-listened to the first Stormlight book and just had my headphones on, listening to the audiobook, and drawing all these scenes until I got to the scene I had to draw. And in that time, I just started sketching out what I thought a Parshendi warrior would look like. And that's what you see here. And for me, I was drawing it because it was one of the few aspects of the story that I really didn't have a clear vision of in my head. Well, that's not true. There's actually quite a few things in the story that I feel like maybe I don't picture as clearly as I'd like to. And so by drawing it out, I kind of start to explore, well, how would I make these things? How would I make the red and black striations on a Parshendi? Would it be really fine marble-like striations, or would it be coarser, and could there be interesting patterns that help distinguish one parchment from another? So I was really fortunate when Isaac asked me to do the fashion plates based on parchment again for the following books. So I decided to do a female kind of in her lithe state, and then, you know, a masculine and feminine one over here. And even though they appear in black and white in the book, I actually have the originals here to show you guys. If you're interested, you can start to see I actually conceive of them in color, at least in this case, because I thought the color was so important for these characters. Hopefully you can see that here. I don't know about the light. So here we have the live state. And here, this one, it's not totally complete yet. I was still uncertain about the background and how I wanted to treat that. And some things work in color that don't work in black and white. So I decided to finish it off on the computer before I really decided what I wanted to do with it. And then I'll go back and I'll probably finish them here. But these are rather small for me, but for book size and for black and white, they kind of suffice like that. And almost everything you see in the books I've painted, you can see a little bit of Warbreaker up there, traditionally in oil paints before it gets a little bit of work done in Photoshop. And then Isaac takes over and makes it look beautiful in the book that hopefully you're holding today in your hands. Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed a little peek at the studio and some of the creation of the art for Rhythm of War. Enjoy your night.
Thank you, Dan, for sending that to us, and thank you for not rickrolling us with it. So, so Dan's always great to work with, and I hope to be able to have more fashion plates from him in future books. So we are almost done here, but let's highlight Navani sketchbook notebook pages in this. These come from Kelly Harris, and Kelly Harris has started doing the Navani notebook pages for us in the last book, replacing the art that I did. So there was a big jump in quality that I'm sure in between books Navani had been practicing quite a bit. And Kelly couldn't get us a video, but she sent me a little note saying that she loves being a part of the Stormlight books, and she sends her gratitude to Team Dragonsteel and also to all of the readers who are loving her art. She really appreciates the kind comments that everybody is giving. These are a collaboration really between me and Kelly. When I read the book, I actually thumbnail some of these things out, and I have to lay it out because we later have to put women's script text in there. So I do a little bit of layout. I tell Kelly, this is where we need some things. She does some concept art. We go back and forth. We show it to Brandon. And we whittle it down into the pieces that how we want them to be. And we'll just kind of scroll through these here. They're all in women's script. So the first one, we have the flying ships. We have some things about capturing Spren. We have the crystal pillar room. If we go to the next one, we have a cool looking dagger, and then some cymatic pattern type things that we have been seeing throughout the books up to this point. Anyway, we are very grateful to always have Kelly on board now with these books, with Navani's notebook pages, and thank you, Kelly, for lending your genius to this book. Lastly, there's the maps. And I'm just going to say I love putting together the maps because Naz gets to kind of come out and annotate things and say all sorts of crazy, snarky stuff. And if it's over the top or too much, that's my fault, not Brandon's. He lets me kind of do some fun things with Naz there. I imagine him to have, so my kids are watching the new DuckTales now, and the Scrooge McDuck I've been hearing. And I'm like, oh, that Scrooge McDuck is great. And I found out that it's David Tennant. And I am who is Scottish, right? So, and I'm a big Doctor Who fan. So if you want to read the Naz pages or the little notes in sort of a gruff Scottish accent, that's how I imagine them, or a kind of gruff Peter Capaldi. That's how I imagine it. So one thing I do want to point out on the map of Aesir and Emul is we've talked about Tuckerizations a little bit. And this year, Kara's grown her team quite a bit. And so we added some Tuckerizations to this map in the form of cities. So if you go to the acknowledgements and see if you can match up some of those. I do want to point out the Rossendar and say he was somebody who helped us with the Knights Radiant quiz. And I was very grateful for that help. So his name is a little bit bigger on the map. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you for enjoying the book. Thank you for enjoying the art and for letting us do crazy things with these books that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So thank you very much.
Actually, my sister Jane, who runs Lightweaver, my charitable foundation, she put together a thing. I'm not exactly sure what even is in it because I haven't seen it yet, but she does a lot of the work that we do for charity. She kind of oversees that. And so she put together a little thing for you guys, and then I'll be back with some more readings for you.
Hi, I am Jane Horn, Director of the Lightweaver Foundation. The Lightweaver Foundation was founded in 2015 by Brandon and Emily Sanderson, and since then has been able to contribute to many causes around the world. One of our favorite projects during the holiday season is decorating a tree for the Festival of Trees program in the Greater Salt Lake area. These trees are auctioned off and all proceeds go directly to the Intermountain Healthcare Foundation and Primary Children's Hospital. Every year, our tree is themed around the next Brandon Sanderson book to be released. A unique feature of our tree includes an ornament that showcases a symbol that corresponds with the new release. In the past, fans have asked where they can get this Sanderson-themed ornament. We are happy to announce that for the first time, these ornaments will be available to everyone. This year's limited edition ornament features the new Stormlight symbol designed by Isaac Stewart. Each ornament is hand-blown cobalt blue glass with an etched symbol and date of release. This collector's piece will be available while supplies last, as each year a new ornament design will be released. Each ornament is $15 and includes free global shipping. All proceeds from your ornament purchase will go directly to the Lightweaver Foundation. We would love to help you give back this holiday season, as every donation will help further our mission and project outreach. If you'd like to learn more about the Lightweaver Foundation or purchase an ornament, please visit our website at lightweaver.org.
All right, so we're going to do a couple more questions. Why don't you bring up 2 sheets for us, if you would, Isabel. These, again, are questions that people from the various bookstores submitted. So let's see. What do you think you'll do after the Cosmere is finished? I will die. It's highly, let's cross that bridge when we get to it. I am focused completely on getting this done within a healthy human being's lifespan. We have seen Whit tell stories that others told incomplete versions of earlier in the book. Is this an in-world coincidence, or is he aware of those stories being told? It is a little of both. Nothing mystical is happening here. He doesn't automatically know if a story is being told, but he keeps an eye on things, shall we say, and finds out things that he shouldn't know. All right. Nail seems to be able to sense Lift Stormlight even before she uses it after she eats the roll. Is this an ability of him as a surge binder, a herald, or something external he's doing or using? Raffo! After you decided that you didn't need to be cagey about Cosmere references, did the structure or plot of the Cosmere change? The structure or plot of the overall Cosmere is always being tweaked as I am getting further along. This is less has to do with me being willing to put more of it into the books. For what those who don't know, what this is referencing is, early in my career, I had been told that I came from the 90s where continuity was a scary thing to a lot of people. And television shows would not have a consistent continuity. They'd be episodic and things. And so I was worried that the story behind the story of the Cosmere would overtake the story of a given book, and I was really worried about that making people feel left out or things like that. As I experimented, I found that I'd been too subtle. People found the things, they enjoyed it, and indeed people weren't feeling left out by some of these things as long as I was careful with them. So I basically allowed myself to go a little further in each book with how much we've referenced the greater Cosmere. This hasn't changed my outline for the Cosmere, but writing the books has. All right, so we'll get back to the story time. The last piece that I read, Lyra Partnell, was written in 2007. And you may be aware of something else that happened to me in 2007, and that was the Wheel of Time. And this was one of the reasons why I put Lyra Partnell aside, was because I wasn't satisfied with the book, but I also knew that I had a lot of work to do. And indeed, we are entering now the era of my career I will call the Brandon almost goes insane era. This was when we built up the company quite a bit because I was working so much. And indeed, people ask me sometimes, they're like, are you worried you're going to get burned out? If I didn't get burned out during this period, then I'm never going to get burned out. Because during this period, from 2007 till about 2015, I wrote and released 3 Wheel of Time books and 2 Stormlight books and Alloy of Law and some other things. And this was kind of a crazy period. Emmett and I were still living in a little townhome in Provo that was really small, did not have a finished basement. It basically had a 1-room basement. And so I would go down there and work in the basement so that Joel, who was a toddler at the time, couldn't find me. But there was no heat down there and no insulation, so I'd be heaped up with blankets around me in the winter, typing away on Perrin scenes, writing these books in this little townhome. It was kind of a crazy, crazy time. Peter had to work in that environment as well after we hired him, so sorry, Peter. Peter does not respond well to cold, so he has never forgotten those days in the basement. He, I think, really appreciated it when he moved into an actual house with a finished basement. But things were very, very busy during this time. And indeed, you got to feel a sense of it if you were following along at the time, because Tor, suddenly my books took off and were selling a lot of copies. And so suddenly Tor started releasing them faster. Instead of sitting on them for 2 years, they're like, why are we not releasing these Brandon Sanderson books we have? And they would just start releasing them. And so suddenly I went from having a 2-year lead time on every book to, as soon as I turn in a book, like 3 months later, the book is out almost, right? Like we turned in Rhythm of War like early September, late August, and it's already out. So big difference from the years where we would have 2 years of lead time. During this time, how I chose projects changed again, kind of dramatically, because either I had something that I was contracted to write, and so I had to choose that thing. I couldn't suddenly decide, I'm not going to write Towers of Midnight now. No, Towers of Midnight needs to be written. And I also started to kind of, with my own time, if I had time between projects, stretch for things that were very different. The way that I prevent burnout normally, and this is I really developed during this time, was to reach for different styles of writing, to do something unlike anything I'd done before. And so during this time, you find me just kind of doing crazy things. This actually started with Alcatraz, back when I was working on the Mistborn books. It was the first time I needed a break and needed to do something different. And as an aside, for a while, when Mistborn was not selling very well, but Alcatraz was looking like it would sell very well, I wondered if my career would take off as a middle grade writer, and I would end up having that be my career. That's a kind of potential career path for me, is being a middle grade, writing middle grade goofy fantasies like the Alcatraz books. That reversed as Mistborn finally started taking off. You can watch, I've talked about that before, what happened with Mistborn. We just needed a good repackage and that second book to come out, and suddenly that series really took off. But there is an alternate dimension world where Brandon is writing lots of goofy middle grade fantasies. So actually what I want to read to you now is something along those lines that I wrote. I was looking for a book that I didn't publish that was written in the early 2010s. And the one I came up with was the book I Hate Dragons, which you may have heard of because I started it as a little writing exercise on my blog. And I had completely forgotten that after I had done that little writing exercise on my blog, I'd been like, what if I wrote a few chapters of this? And so I wrote like 4 chapters of it after what happened on the blog. And then a deadline came due for something more important and beyond. The book was just kind of feeling too light and fluffy, and so I was not interested in finishing it. But the premise of this is that there is a young man who smells really good to dragons and always gets used as bait in traps to trap dragons. He has trapped a dragon by being bait, and now he's wandering around that night. The first thing Skip noticed was the beating of enormous wings. He knew instantly what they meant. After 300 or 400 dragon attacks, you learn to pick up on the signs. He panicked, of course. He always panicked when a dragon approached. Fortunately, he trained himself not to let that get in the way. So while one, primal, a big lizard is going to eat me side of his brain started going in circles, the other side went through a list. Was there water nearby? No. Could he hide in a cellar with a door? No. Could he obscure his scent somehow? No. He'd assumed himself well protected. He doused himself with rose water before leaving the camp, and his pockets were stuffed with garlic cloves. People 3 cities away could probably smell the stench, but he'd been certain he didn't smell like himself. But that didn't always work. The dragons would find him anyway, particularly if he stayed in one place too long. But he was moving. He should have been safe. Safer, at least. The 2 sides of his brain collided back together and both told him to run. He dashed forward, hoping to find some kind of cave. It was night, but the moon was near full, so he had a good view of the hills around him. The grassy, pleasant, completely unbroken, not a cave in sight hills. The wing beats were getting closer. He couldn't outrun a dragon in flight. He suddenly felt himself an idiot for having left the hunters. At least there he'd have a chance, someone to fight for him, surprise the dragon, and Skip forced himself to slow. I only have one chance, he realized. He slowed until he was merely strolling. He stuffed his hand in his pocket, beside the garlic, and held his pack over his shoulder with the other. He started whistling, trying not to sound too forced. "It sure is a good night for a stroll," he said after a good whistle. "Alone, without anyone to protect or guard me. What a nice breeze that is approaching from behind." He felt a chill between his shoulder blades, as if someone had stabbed him with an icicle. The dragon was flying down toward him. It would grab him in its claws, tear him with its teeth. It was so hard not to look. The beats of the wings changed. Something massive and black flew past, about 100 yards away, red eyes watching him. Dragon eyes glowed. The creature winged to the side and landed on a nearby rock. It seemed wary. Skip looked at it and tried to feign surprise. That tied his brain in knots, and he ended up just staring. That seemed to make the dragon even more worried. Its slender neck looked from side to side in suspicion. "Your acting is terrible," the monster proclaimed. "So I've been told. I smell no hunters. Where are they?" Skip resisted the urge to exhale in relief. The other dragon had assumed he was bait. It had actually worked. Hunters?" Skip said, trying to sound nervous. "I don't know what you mean." "You'd have me believe you were out here alone." "Sure am. In dragon territory." "Oh, this is dragon territory?" "At night." "My, how the time has passed. I didn't notice." "I realize that humans are often oblivious, but this seems incredible even for one of you." "Is it that obvious?" "Yes, nobody is so stupid." "I wouldn't bet on that." Dragon leaned forward on his rock, looking down. Skip stood nervously. I guess you can go now," Skip said. "What about the hunters?" "You figured out what we're doing," Skip said, "so we can't surprise you. You might as well fly away. We'll never kill you this way." "I want to see where you've hidden them." "Don't be foolish. Do you have any idea how long it takes to dig in the grass and hide 50 armed soldiers? If they climb out now, it'll be hours getting them back in for the next dragon." The dragon's eyes narrowed further, and he leaned forward on his hilltop. Despite the moonlight, it was difficult to make out much regarding him. Black on black, scales that shone softly, red eyes. Something was odd, though. Skip couldn't put his finger on it. "I can't let your trap remain here," the dragon said. "My brother is flying in these parts. He might fall into it. In fact, a large number of my kin have gone missing in the last few weeks. We have been told specifically to watch for a group of hunters in the area. You haven't seen my brother, have you?" "Can't say that I have. What's his name?" "Haragaldokermakalbakalakaloobaloobalo." The word was unlike any that Skip had heard. There were sounds in it, unnatural ones, unexpected ones, like getting a teddy bear filled with razor blades for your birthday. Hearing the name made Skip's ears want to rebel and maybe take a turn at smelling things instead. "Nope, never heard of him. We certainly didn't kill him earlier today. I hope." "I don't care how many hunters you have, little man. You have just sealed your fate. I bring you death this night. Those words will be the last that..." "What? Hey, wait." "Call your hunters, little man. I will best them." No, really, wait. Just realized what's wrong. You don't look maddened by my scent." "Your scent? Why should I care about that?" "But how did you find me?" "I saw you, little man, walking draconic lands is asking to be devoured, and so, while I'm somewhat full from a taxman I ate earlier, I decided to come down and make a feast of you. It's the principle of the matter, really. But you smell nothing? I can't smell. Inhaled some acidic smoke as a dragon lean, burned my nostrils fiercely. Oh, Skip thought, how wonderful. A dragon who wouldn't, upon smelling him, get driven near insane? It was amazing, incredible, and actually ironic, for it seemed that this was the dragon who, at long last, would end up eating him. So let's do 2 more of those questions. 2 more sheets of questions. All right, first one is, I am asked to wish happy birthday to Tyler. Happy birthday, Tyler. I hope that you're watching, or if you're not, you can come see this another time and get birthday wishes. And to anyone else whose birthday happens to be now or around this time. What's the longest amount of time in one sitting you've spent entirely writing this series? It was probably the day I spent finishing Rhythm of War, which was about a year ago. A little more or a little less than a year ago. You can find it in my Twitter feed and my Facebook feed where I said, we're going to finish this book today. And my family supported me, and I went downstairs and I wrote all day. It was like 12 or 13 hours, I think, something like that. So there you go. What culture inspired the Horn Eaters? So I don't usually use a single culture for any of my inspirations. I like to mix a bunch of things together, and some will be real world cultures and others will not be. You can probably pick out the Polynesian influences as well as the Russian influences. So they're kind of like Siberian Polynesians. But really the thing that inspired them, the Polynesian part came from the language. I'm fascinated with languages, and one of the cool things about the Hawaiian language in particular, which was the inspiration here, is that because there are so many fewer sounds, the words get extra long. And that's why a lot of the words in Hawaiian are so long compared to some other languages, because they repeat sounds more often, and they're just by simple math, you end up needing longer words. And I like how poetic the Hawaiian language sounds and things like that, so that's obviously one inspiration. But a big inspiration for them was the original idea of their myths, the ones that Rock shares and talks about, and their interaction with the Spren. I wanted a race, a culture on Roshar that had both its roots in human culture and in listener culture. Horn Eaters are human and listener hybrids like the Herdazians are, and whose cultural roots went back to both cultures and had built something new out of them. So that's the primary inspiration. Which is your favorite, somewhat lesser-known fantasy series? So every time I'm asked for favorites, it's a little hard for me to pick out because my favorites change based on the times. And sometimes what is lesser known also changes based on the time. Like when I was growing up, Anne McCaffrey was the big bestseller. But I don't know if Dragon Riders of Pern is commonly read anymore. And so is that lesser known? Is it not? I usually point to Daniel Abraham's Long Price Quartet, which are fantastic lesser known very short, epic fantasies with an awesome magic system. If you don't know who Daniel Abraham is, he is one half of the author that writes The Expanse under a pseudonym with Ty Frank, I believe is the other one, George R. R. Martin's assistant. And so give that one a look. It is quite good. Why don't we do 2 more of those, and that'll end the questions for tonight. Sorry if I didn't get to your question. We've seen that metal-born siblings can end up with different powers. What about metal-born twins? Can happen. Most likely they will have the same power. Were there ever characters you've written that got surprising reaction from readers? Yes, and you can go get another one because this one will be fast. The most surprising reaction I get is always on the side characters I don't expect anyone to pay any attention to. Things like how people will sometimes latch onto, like the obvious example is the stick, but other side characters and little things like that. Like when I was writing Yalb in the first Stormlight book, I was surprised by how affectionate people were for y'all. And so that's why he has a cameo and something else I've done to let you get an update on where y'all is. So let's do one more set of these. How do you balance creating new and wonderful series while continuing to develop the worlds you already created? Actually, let's do that one next, because that'll segue me into the next thing. Out of all the characters you created, which one do you most personify with? I'm not sure if personify is the right term. Identify might be what they're looking for. Maybe it's the right use. I'm not sure if that's another use of personify. So I would say that it is the character I'm writing right now. Whoever I'm writing at the moment is the one I have to identify with the most. I shamelessly stole that answer from Robert Jordan. It's the way he answered this question. But really, I put a bit of me into every character I write. Every character is a balance between me and not me. In the Stormlight Archive in particular, I often point at Jasna as the one I think is most like me, but that just depends on how I'm feeling at the moment. Interestingly, there's a thing that Jasna says in this book that my beta readers were all like, this is like cliched thing for an atheist to say. And I'm like, no, that's my answer to the question. Brandon's answer, overruled because I was having Jasna speak from my own. It wasn't me looking for the atheist answer. It was me looking for how I would answer Brandon Sanderson. It's Jasna's little thing that she talks about with hope in the book. So let's go back to this one. How do you balance creating new and wonderful series while continuing to develop the worlds you already created? Thank you for adding the wonderful in there, whoever asked this. And Isabel, thank you so much. We leveled up a lot when we started having Isabel write out questions instead of me. And she does a wonderful job with that. So the balance gets into this whole question, right? How do I decide? We've kind of entered into the modern era now, talking about how I choose now. Because now is the time where I've started to really realize, hey, if I want to finish the Cosmere by the time I'm in my 70s, I need to be focused. I need to maybe stop letting myself deviate quite as often, which has been kind of a harsh realization for me, because throughout the rest of my career, up until like the last 5 years, I just always thought, I'll write whatever strikes me when the time strikes me, and that's how I write. That's what I want to do. And at this point, I kind of hit a tipping point where I realized wanting to finish the Stormlight Archive and the Cosmere is more important to me than the freedom of just being able to write whatever I want, whenever I want. And this is a thing I gave up when I decided to become published, right? I gave up a bit of that, that the moment I signed a contract for a series, I gave up some of that freedom. And I did it eyes open, knowing that it is something I wanted to do. A lot of times in life, we want to have done things. I wanted to have written a great trilogy like Mistborn. I want to have finished something as powerful and as weighty and hopefully as epic as the Stormlight Archive. These are goals I want to have done. And more, I want to align the momentary parts of my life with the things that I want to have done in the future, if that makes any sense. And this is starting to change a little bit the way that I approach letting myself be distracted. You'll notice that my upcoming books are, there are no secrets among those. I am finishing Wax and Wane and the Skyward series, and then finishing the first arc of the Stormlight Archive. And this is me just understanding that I don't have to really amp it up, but I do have to be consistently on target. And this kind of brings me to the end. I do have one more reading for you, but as I was thinking about opportunity cost, the thing that really settled in my mind was this idea of what do I want to have done rather than what do I want to do now. And I started to look at each of these stories I've written, and it's interesting in that each story that I write is almost like a picture, a snapshot of who I am at the time. Sometimes I get questions from writers. One of these happened on stream recently where they say, what do I do if I'm such a perfectionist that I can't finish revising a story, or I can't bear to let a story out there. And the answer, at least for me, to this question is to realize the stories are pictures of you. The stories both cannot be perfect and are already perfect at the same time. When you are done with them, when that picture of what you can do as a writer is finished at that time, then it's time to let go of that book and say, here it is. This is the picture of me. I have zits right now because I'm a teenager or whatever, and this is the prom picture. Who cares? This is who I am right now. The books that I've read to you, particularly those early ones, a little bit rough, but they were pictures of a developing artist. And for me, part of their value is that snapshot of who I was at the time. And when it comes to this opportunity cost, I think that sometimes, at least in picking books, what I'm not acknowledging is that whatever book I pick is actually going to develop to be a picture of who I am right now. And so in some ways, it doesn't really matter. And so I kind of combine those two things. It doesn't really matter, but also I want to have done things. And I put those together, and that is how, these days, I am picking which books I work on. And to that end, I want to share one more thing with you. Now, I wasn't going to read this, but I was thinking about this, this whole year we've gone through. And it's not over yet, right? Still wearing masks. My poor children still don't know if school's going to go online or not in the imminent future. And my son Joel is struggling through his first year of junior high with half the time it being home and half the time it being there. And it has just been a really rough year for a lot of people. And so I thought, I'm going to go ahead and read the thing that I sent to my company. I said, you guys, what do you think? And they're like, well, it does kind of spoil some things, but maybe it's time. So I'm actually going to read to you from the sequel to Six of the Dusk, which takes place during the space age of the Cosmere. And so there are going to be some fun things in here that you're not going to get to see in depth for a while. So if you are worried about space age of the Cosmere being spoiled for you, I might recommend, waiting for 15 years before you read this. But I'm going to do a short reading. So this is something I've been perpetually working on for a few years. And this is not yet canon because I haven't released it. So it's entirely possible that I'll change some of this, but for now, this is from the sequel to Six of the Dusk, which I haven't named. It's not Seventh of the Dusk. If you want to read the original story, it is in Arcanum Unbounded, or you can get the ebook, I think still as a standalone from our store or from any ebook stores that you want. But the cheaper way is Arcanum Unbounded because you'll get all of the Cosmere stories, short stories. So, here we go. The ones above were human. Dusk had imagined them as strange and terrible creatures with faces full of fangs. Artist renditions of them from the broadsheets tended to err on the side of mystery, showing beings with dark pits where faces should be, as if representing the darkness of space itself, confined somehow into their strange outfits and helmets. Truth was, nobody had known until this moment, when attempting to inspire trust, the two aliens from another world retracted their helmets and displayed shockingly human features. Dusk stepped forward in the observation chamber, which overlooked the landing pad. The chamber was supposed to be secret, with reflective glass on the outside, but Dusk had never trusted that to hide him. The ones above had machines that could sense life, and he suspected they could see him, or at least his aviar, regardless of the barrier. He'd have preferred to be out on the landing platform with the diplomats, but he supposed he should be thankful that they even let him attend. There were many among the politicians and company leadership who were baffled by Vathi's continued reliance on him. The government officials in the room with him gasped as they saw the faces of the aliens. One male, one female, it seemed, with pale skin that looked like it had never seen the sun. Perhaps it hadn't, considering they lived out in the emptiness between planets. Their helmets retracted automatically, but left stylized metal portions covering the sides of the head, reaching out and covering the cheeks. From the look of the delicate metal, ribbed like ripples of waves, those portions didn't seem like ornament or armor, more like ornament. On his shoulder, Sek squawked softly. Dusk glanced at the jet-black aviar, then looked around the room, seeking signs of his corpse. The bird can show him glimpses of the future, revealing his visions, his own dead body, ways he could, or perhaps should, have died.
It took him a moment to spot the death. It was out on the launch pad. One of the two aliens stood with her foot on Dusk's skull, the face smoldering as if burned by some terrible alien weapon. What did it mean? Sek's visions had been off ever since that event 5 years ago, when the alien device had been activated on Pachi. Once, seeing the corpse would have warned Dusk of immediate danger, a biting insect with deadly venom, or a hidden predator. Now, the warnings often felt more abstract. The ones above were unlikely to kill him today, no matter what he did, but that did not mean they were safe or trustworthy. "Toward a new era of prosperity," one of them said out on the launch pad, extending a hand to Vathi, who stood at the head of the diplomats. "Between our peoples and yours, President." She took the hand, though Dusk, personally, would rather have handled a deadly asp. It seemed worse to him somehow to know that the ones above were human. An alien monster with features like something that had emerged from the deepest part of the ocean was somehow more knowable than these smiling humans. Familiar features should not cover such alien motives and ideas. It was as wrong as an aviar that could not fly. "To prosperity," Vathi said. Her voice was audible to him as if she were standing beside him. It emerged from the speakers on the wall, devices developed using alien technology. "It is good," the second alien said, speaking the language of the home isles as easily as if she had been born to it. "You are finally listening to reason. Our masters do not have infinite patience." "We are accustomed to impatient masters," Vathi said, voice smooth and confident. "We have survived their tests for millennia." The male laughed. "Your masters, the gods who are islands?" "Just be ready to accept our installation when we return, yes?" the female said. "No masks, no deception." She tapped the side of her head, and her helmet extended again, obscuring her features. The male did the same, and together they left, climbing aboard their sleek flying machine, which is in the shape of a triangle with pointed toward the sky. It soon took off, streaking toward the air without a sound. Its ability to land and take off baffled explanation. The only thing the Dust people knew about the process was that the ones above had requested the launch pad may be made entirely out of steel. The smaller ship would supposedly meet with a larger one that was in orbit around the planet, ship larger than even the greatest of the steam-powered behemoths that Dusk's people had used here on First of the Sun. Dusk had only just been getting used to those creations, but now he had to accustom himself to something new. The even, calm light of electric lights, the hum of a fan powered by alien energy. The ones above had technology so advanced, so incredible, that Dusk and his people might as well have been traveling by canoe like their ancestors. They were far closer to those days than they were to sailing the stars like these aliens. As soon as the alien ship disappeared into the sky, the generals and company officials began chatting in animated ways. It was their favorite thing, talking. Like Aviar, who'd come home to roost by the light of the evening sun, eager to tell all the others about the worms they had eaten. Sek pulled close to his hand, then pecked at the band that kept his dark hair in a tail. She wanted to hide, though she was no chick, capable of snuggling in his hair as she once had. Sek was as big as his head, though he was comfortable and accustomed to her weight, and he wore a shoulder pad that her claws could grip without hurting him. He lifted his hand and crooked his index finger, inviting her to stretch out at her neck for scratching. She did so, but he made a wrong move, and she squawked at him and then pecked his finger in annoyance. She was grouchy as usual. He felt the same way, honestly. Vathi had said it was because city life didn't agree with him, but Dusk blamed a different source. It had been 2 years since they'd lost Cokerly to disease. Without that colorful buffoon around to chatter and stick his beak into trouble, the two of them had grown old and surly. Sek had nearly died from the same disease, and then alien medicine from the ones above. The terrible aviar plague, same as those that had occasionally ravaged the population in the past, had been smothered in weeks, gone, wiped out, as easy as tying a double hitch. Dusk ignored the generals and their chattering, eventually coaxing Sek into a head scratch as they waited. Everything about this new life in the modern city, full of machines and people with clothing as colorful as any plumage, seemed so sanitized, not clean. Steam machines weren't clean, but fabricated, deliberate, confined. This room with its smooth woods and steel beams was an example. Here, nature was restricted to an armrest, where even the grain of the wood was oriented to be aesthetically pleasing. Soon, with the coming of the ones above and their ways, he doubted there would be any wilderness left on the planet. Parks, perhaps, preserves. But you couldn't put wilderness in a box, no more than you could capture the wind. You could enclose the air, but it wasn't the same thing. Soon the door opened, and Vathi herself entered, her AVR on her shoulder. Vathi had risen high these last few years, president of the company, one of the most powerful politicians in the city. She wore a colorful striped skirt of an old pattern and a businesslike blouse and jacket. As always, she tried through everything she did, dress included, to embrace a meeting of old ways and new. He wasn't sure you could capture tradition by putting its trappings on a skirt any more than you could box the wind, but he appreciated the effort. Well, Vathi said to the group of officials, we've got 3 months, but they're not going to stand any further delays. Thoughts? Everyone had an idea. Ways to stall further, plans to feign ignorance of the deadline or to plausibly pretend that something had gone wrong with the AVR delivery. Silly little plans. The ones above would not be delayed this time, and they would not simply trade for birds upon the whims of the home islanders. The aliens intended to put a production plant right on one of the outer isles, and there begin raising and shipping their own AVR. Maybe we could resist somehow, said Thule, company strategist who had a colorful AVR of Cokerly's same breed. We could fake a coup and overthrow the government, force the ones above to deal with a new organization, reset the talks. A bold idea, far more radical than the others. And if they simply decide simply to take us over, said General Second of Saplings, wrapping his hand on a stack of papers that he held in his other hand, you should see these projections. We can't fight them. If the mathematicians are right, the orbital ships could reduce our grandest cities to rubble with a casual shot or two. If the ones above are feeling bored, they could wipe us out in a dozen more interesting ways, like shooting into the ocean so waves wash away our infrastructure. They won't attack, Vathi said. 6 years or more, and they've suffered our delays with nothing more than threats. There are rules out there in space that prevent them from simply conquering us. They've already conquered us, Dust said softly. Strange how quickly the others quieted when he spoke. They complained about his presence in these meetings. They thought him a wild man, lacking social graces. They claimed to hate how he'd watched them, refusing to engage in their conversation. But when he spoke, they listened. Words had their own economics, as sure as gold did. The ones in short supply were the ones that secretly everyone wanted. Dusk, Vathi said, what did you say? We are conquered, he said, turning from the window to regard her. He cared not for the others, but she didn't just grow quiet when he spoke. She listened. The plague that took Cokerly, how long did they sit in their ship up there, watching as our AVR died? They didn't have the medicine on hand, said Third of Waves, the company officer of medical industry, a squat man with a bright red AVR that let him see colors invisible to everyone else. They had to wait to fetch it. Dusk remained quiet. You imply, Vathi said, that they deliberately delayed giving us the medicine until AVR had died. What proof do you have? The dark out last month, Dusk said. The ones above were quick to share their more common technologies, lights that burned cold and true, fans to circulate air in the muggy home isle summers, ships that could move at several times the speed of the steam-powered ones. But all these ran on power sources supplied from above, and those power sources deactivated if opened. Their fish farms are a boom to our oceans, said the company's Secretary of Supply. But without the nutrients sold by the ones above, we wouldn't be able to keep the farms running. The medicine is invaluable, said Third of Waves. Infant mortality has plummeted. Literally thousands of our people live because of what the ones above have traded us. When they were late with the power shipment last month, Dust said, the city slowed to a crawl, and we know that was intentional from the accidentally leaked comments. They wanted to reinforce to us their power. They will do it again. Everyone fell silent, thinking as he wished they'd do more often. Sek squawked again, and Dust glanced at the launch pad. His corpse was still out there, laying where the ones above had left, burned and withered. Show in the other alien, Vathi said to the guards. The 2 men at the door, with security AVR on the shoulders and wearing feathers on their military caps, stepped out. They returned shortly with an incredibly strange figure. The other aliens wore uniforms and helmets, unfamiliar clothing, but still recognizable. This creature stood 7 feet tall and was encased entirely in steel, armor of a futuristic cast, smooth and bright, with a soft violet blue glowing at the joints. The helmet glowed at the front with a slit-like visor and an arcane symbol, reminding Dust vaguely of a bird in flight, etched the front of the breastplate. The ground shook beneath these beings' steps as it entered the room. That armor, it was surreal, like interlocking plates that somehow produced no visible seam. Just layered pieces of metal covering everything from fingers to neck. obviously airtight, with a rounded cast to it. The outfit had stiff iron hoses connecting helmet and armor. The other aliens might have looked human, but Dusk was certain this alien was something frightful. It was too tall, too imposing to be a simple human. Perhaps he was not looking at a man at all, but instead a machine that spoke as one. "You did not tell them you had met me," the alien said, projecting a male voice from speakers at the front of the helmet. The voice had an unnatural cast to it, not an accent, like someone from a backwater isle, but a kind of unnatural air. "No," Vathy said, "but you were right. They ignored each of my proposals and acted as if the deal were already done. They intend to set up their own facility on one of the islands." "You have only one gem with which to bargain, people of the Isles," the alien said. "You cannot withhold it. You can merely determine to whom you offer it. If you do not accept my protection, you will become a vassal to these ones above. Your planet will become a farming station, like many others, intended to feed their expansion efforts. Your birds will be stripped from you the moment it becomes possible to do so." "And you offer something better?" Vathy asked. "My people will give you back 1 of 100 birds born," the armored figure said, "and will allow you to fight alongside us if you wish to gain status and elevation." 1 in 100? Second of Sapling said, the outburst unsettling his gray and brown aviar. "Robbery! Choose cooperation, slavery, or death." "And if I choose not to be bullied?" Sapling snapped, reaching to his side, perhaps unconsciously, for the repeating pistol he carried in a holster. The alien thrust out his armored hand, and smoke or mist coalesced there out of nowhere. It formed into a gun, longer than a pistol, shorter than a rifle. Wicked in shape, with flowing metal along the sides like wings, it was to Sapling's pistol what a shadowy, deep beast of the oceans might be to a minnow. The alien raised his other hand, snapping a small box, perhaps a power supply, into the side of the rifle, causing it to glow ominously. "Tell me, President," the alien said to Vathy, "what are your local laws regarding challenges to my life? Do I have legal justification to shoot this man?" "No," Vathy said, firm, though a voice was audibly shaken. "You may not." "I do not play games," the alien said. "I will not dance with words like the others do. You will accept my offer or you will not. If you do not, you join them, and I will have legal right to consider you my enemies." The room remained still, Sapling carefully edging his hand away from his sidearm. "I do not envy your decision," the armored alien said. "You have been thrust into a conflict you do not understand. But like a child who has found himself in the middle of a war zone, you will have to decide which direction to run. I will return in 1 month, local time." The colored portion of the creature's armor started to glow more brightly, a sky blue or a deep violet that seemed far too inviting color to come from this strange being. He lifted into the air a few inches, then finally pulled the power pack from his gun, dismissing the weapon to vanish in a puff of mist. He left without further word, gliding back out the hallway past the guards, who stepped away and didn't impede him. This alien arrived without a ship, but didn't seem to need one to travel the stars. He had flown down out of the sky under the power of, they assumed, his strange and magnificent armor. Once he had gone, the 2 guards took up positions at the door, sheepishly holding their rifles. They knew, as everyone in the room knew, that no guard would stop a creature like that one if he decided to kill. Vathy pulled a chair over to the room's small table, then sat down in a slumping posture, her aviar crawling anxiously across her back from one shoulder to the other. "This is it," she whispered. "This is our fate, caught between the ocean wave and the breaking stone." This job had weathered her. Dusk missed the woman who had been so full of life and optimism for the new advances of the future. Unfortunately, she was right, so there was no sense in offering meaningless aphorisms. Besides, she had not asked a question, so he did not respond. Sek chirped, and a body appeared on the table in front of Vathy. Dusk frowned. Then that frown deepened, because the corpse was not his. Never in all his time bonded to Sek had she shown him anything other than his own corpse. Even during that dangerous time years ago when her abilities had grown erratic, even then she'd shown Dusk his own body, just many copies of it. He stepped across the room and Vathy looked up at him, seeming relieved, as if she'd expected him to comfort her. She frowned then when he mostly ignored her to look down on the body on the table. Female, very old, long hair having gone white. The corpse wore an unfamiliar uniform after the cut of the ones above. Commendations on the breast pocket, but in another language. "It's her," he thought, studying the aged face. "It's Vathy, some 40 years in the future, dead and dressed for a funeral." "Dusk?" the living Vathy asked. "What do you see?" "Corpse," Dusk said, causing some of the others in the room to murmur. They were uncomfortable with Sek's power, which was unique among aviar.
That's wonderfully descriptive, Dusk, Vathy said. One might think that after 5 years, you might learn to answer with more than one word when someone talks to you. He grunted, walking around the vision of the corpse. The dead woman held something in her hands. What was it? Corpse, he said, then moved to the living Vathy's eye, then met the living Vathy's eyes. Yours. Mine, Vathy said, rising. She glanced at Sek, who huddled on Dusk's shoulder, feathers pulled tight. Why? Has you ever done this before? Dusk shook his head, rounding the corpse. The body wears a uniform, one of theirs, the ones above. There are symbols on some of the patches and awards. It appears as if prepared for burial at sea. I cannot read the alien writing. One of the generals scrambled to get him paper and pen. After handing it over, the general backed away, regarding the table as one might a night moth that was ready to pounce. Dusk copied the letters on the uniform's most prominent patch. Vathy, read the Secretary of Supply, Colonial Governor of the occupied planet, first of the sun. All eyes in the room turned toward Vathy, all but Dusk's. He knew what she looked like. So he kept writing, then nudged the Secretary of Supply again. Looks like a commendation for valor, the woman replied, for putting down what was called the Rebellion of 05. The others are similar. Dusk nodded. So if this was a glimpse of the future, it was what Vathy would do when she died, or would be when she died, a servant of the ones above, apparently having turned his people's military against rebels who didn't agree. Well, that made sense. He nodded to himself and tried to get a closer look at what the corpse was holding, a small disc or coin of some sort with a drawing on it. Dusk, you don't seem as horrified as you should be, the living Vathy said to him. Why would I be horrified? He said. This makes sense. It's what you would do, probably what you will do. I'm no traitor, she said. He didn't reply. It hadn't been a question, even if it was an incorrect statement. Leave us, she said to the others. Please, we can discuss this prophecy later. I need to confer with the trapper. They didn't like it. They never liked it when Vathy listened to him. Perhaps they'd understand if they listened more themselves. Still, they filed out at the request, leaving 2 humans and 2 aviar alone. Vathy's bird, Miris, hunched down and raised her wings while staring at the table. It seemed that she could sense what Sek was doing. Curious. Dusk, Vathy said, why do you think I'd do these things? Progress, it is your way. Progress is not worth the blood of my people. Progress will come anyway, Dusk said. The dusk is past. This is the night. You will presume to find a new dawn and to do what you must to guide us there. He looked at her, then tried to smile. There is a wisdom to that, Vathy. It is what you taught me many years ago. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the table. Must it be? No, I am not dead, am I? She shook her head. I want a way out, Dusk, a way to fight back against them or something, a way to control our own destiny. They're both so confident that they own us. What I wouldn't give to be able to surprise them. You're holding something, Dusk said, leaning down. A coin, large one, maybe a medallion, not money, engraved with a man on a canoe, wearing feathers and holding aloft a board with wave patterns on it. Some kind of trapper? 10th, the finder, she said. He frowned. Seriously, Dusk? He's one of the most famous explorers and trappers who ever lived. My trainer didn't tell me of him. You could read a book or something. The past is important. If it was important, my trainer would have told me about it. So, this man must not be important. Vathy rolled her eyes. He was the first man to explore Patchy. Then he likely died quickly, Dusk said, nodding. Means he must not have known much. The first explorers were stupid. Not because of themselves, they just didn't have experience yet. He looked to her, cocking an eyebrow. He vanished, she admitted, on his second trip there, but we still used some of his exploration routes as shipping channels to reach the Pantheon Islands. He was important. Dusk didn't reply because why would he contradict her? She liked believing this, and she always seemed fond of the stories of old trappers. She fancied herself an amateur one, even still, despite the fact that she had been one of the ones who ended the entire profession. As Dusk was looking at the medallion, the vision finally vanished. Sek chirped, as if apologetic, and when Dusk looked at her, the bird's eyes were drooping, as if she were exhausted. I'm going to investigate stepping down, Vathy said. A fake coup is silly, but if I simply quit, it could cause political unrest that justifies giving us an excuse to delay negotiations. Plus, it will remove me from a position where I can do damage. Dusk nodded, then felt himself growing uncomfortable. For once, he found that he couldn't remain silent. He looked at her. Another will do worse, Vathy. Another will cause more death. You are better than another. Are you sure? No. How could he be? He could not see the future like Sek could. Still, he crouched down beside Vathy's seat, then held his hand toward her.
She clasped it, then held tight. He nodded to her. "You're stronger than anyone I know," he said, "but you're just one person. I learned 5 years ago that sometimes one person cannot stand before the tide. Then there's no hope." "Of course there is. We must become more than one. We must find allies, Vathi. 2 peoples have come to bully us, to demand that we give up our resources. There must be others, perhaps those who are weak like we are, but with whom together we might be strong. Trapper cannot fight a shadow alone, but a battleship with a full crew, that is something else." "How would we find anyone else, Dusk? The ones above have forbidden us from leaving the planet. We're decades, well, maybe centuries away from building flying machines." "I will go into the darkness," he said. She looked into his eyes, and though she'd objected each other time he suggested this, today she said nothing. At times, she had become like him, and he like her. She made him believe that they could adapt to the future. He just needed to make her believe that he could help. "We sent entire crews into the darkness, Dusk," she said. "Scientists, soldiers." "No trappers." "Well, no." "I will go," he said. "I will find help." "And if you fail?" "Then I will die," he said. "Like your explorer man, 10th the Finder, you called him." Dusk touched his forehead, then pressed his finger against hers. "I gave up Patchy for the planet, Vathi, but I will not give up the planet to those men from the stars, no matter how brilliant their weapons or how amazing their wonders. I will gather you an expedition, some guards, a crew." She met his eyes. "You're going to insist on going alone, aren't you?" He nodded. Fool man. He did not respond because she might be right, but he was going to go anyway. And there we go. So, when will I finish that? Who knows? But it is one of the projects on my radar, is establishing the things that I want to have done. So we can look forward to that in the future. For now, I'm going to go home, and instead of going out on tour for 3 weeks, I'm going to keep writing. Thank you guys for reading. I hope you enjoy Rhythm of War. I hope you've enjoyed being with us tonight, and I hope to provide many, many more books for you in the future.